Many of us have a romantic idea of the Wild West. We picture heroic cowboys riding off into the sunset, noble gunfights at high noon, and rugged individuals tamming the frontier with nothing more than their own grit and a trusty six-shooter. But that couldn't be more wrong. For the vast majority of people, the Wild West was a harsh, unending battle against starvation, sickness, and the very land itself. Let's explore why your chances of lasting just 1 month on the real frontier would be slimmer than winning the lottery 5 times over. Before we dive in, if stories like this help you unwind, a like or subscribe would be fantastic. Also, feel free to drop where you're from and what time it is in the comments. It's always amazing to see people from places like Australia and Norway all watching together. All right, tonight we're heading to the Wild West. But before we go, get comfortable. I mean really, truly comfortable. Got your pillows fluffed and your blanket situation sorted out. Perfect. You're going to want to trust me on this one. So, congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1875, somewhere on the American frontier. The very first thing you notice isn't the cheerful sound of birds or the crisp, fresh air. It's the grit of dirt in your mouth, in your eyes, coating your skin, and wedged between your teeth, because you're lying on a dirt floor. Your back is screaming in protest from a night spent on what could only generously be called a mattress. It's basically just a canvas sack packed with straw, which is now a bustling metropolis for who knows how many different kinds of bugs. A damp, earthy smell fills your every breath, and not in that pleasant way it smells after a fresh rain. This is more like wet soil churned together with animal manure. Unlike your cozy bed right now, you've just spent the night in what the settlers called a soddy, a house constructed literally from the earth. The walls surrounding you are thick blocks of prairie turf, sliced into bricks with the roots and all, and stacked like some kind of filthy Lego creation. The roof is also made of sod, laid over a frame of wooden poles, and you can see it's leaking in at least 3 different spots. You try to sit up and immediately crack your head against a low-hanging ceiling beam. A small dusty shower rains down on your face, and something that feels suspiciously like a beetle lands right in your hair. Welcome to life on the frontier, where the great outdoors is constantly finding new ways to invite itself inside. Well, aren't you just a ray of sunshine this morning? A voice says from a corner of the room. A woman is already busy stoking a small fire inside a cast-iron stove. She looks to be about 40, which on the frontier probably means she's only 25. Life has a way of aging you quickly out here. Best get your britches on. Them cows aren't about to milk themselves, and the chickens are waiting to be fed before we can even begin to think about our own breakfast. You look down and see you're wearing what is essentially a threadbare flannel nightshirt. It's not exactly the fringed leather getup you might have imagined. Your Hollywood-fueled fantasies of the Wild West are already crumbling apart faster than the ceiling of this sad little dirt house. The floor is shockingly cold against your bare feet as you make your way to the window, which is really just a small square hole cut into the sod wall with a piece of oiled paper stretched taut across it. There's no glass to be found. Actual glass windows were a luxury that most settlers couldn't even dream of affording. Through the translucent paper, you can just make out the faint gray glow of dawn. It's likely around 4:30 in the morning. On the frontier, the day starts before the sun does, no matter how terribly you slept the night before. Don't just stand there gawking, the woman says, tossing you a pair of rough canvas pants and a homespun shirt that feels like it was woven from the same material as a potato sack. Your paw's already out tending to the horses. We've got a long day ahead of us. Paw. It seems you now have a frontier father. This is getting stranger by the minute. But before you can even form a question, the woman, who is apparently your mother in this bizarre new life, is pushing a pair of boots in your direction. They are stiff, cracked leather things that have clearly seen better days, and they look to be about half a size too small for you. And mind the snakes when you head to the outhouse, she adds with a casualness that sounds like she's merely mentioning the chance of rain later. I killed a rattler out there just yesterday, but where you find one, there are bound to be more. Snakes in the outhouse, of course, because using a hole in the ground as a toilet wasn't already a delightful enough experience on its own. As you get dressed, you take a moment to really look at the Sadi's interior. The entire house is just one single room, maybe about 15 feet square. There's the cast iron stove, a crude wooden table with 3 chairs that don't match, a small cupboard holding a few dishes and 2 beds. You have the straw-filled instrument of torture you just got up from, and a slightly larger one where you assume your new parents sleep. A few items of clothing hang from pegs hammered into the wall, and a single shelf holds what looks to be a Bible, an almanac, and a glass jar containing something you can't quite identify. Your mother sees you staring at the jar. Pickled beets, she explains, the last of them from the fall. I've been saving them. Outside, the air is sharp and cool. The Sadi is situated on a small rise, which gives you a clear view of the surrounding land. It's nothing like the majestic mountains and dramatic, sweeping canyons you've seen in the Western movies. Instead, all you see is a vast, almost featureless prairie that stretches out to the horizon in every single direction. There are a few scraggly-looking trees near what you guess must be a creek about a quarter-mile away. But other than that, it's just an endless expanse of grass, sky, and a profound sense of emptiness. Near the Sadi stands a small barn, also built from sod, a chicken coop patched together from salvaged wood, and the dreaded outhouse, which is little more than 4 planks of wood arranged around a hole in the ground with a half-door for what they consider privacy. There's a vegetable garden with a rough fence made of branches to keep the animals out, and beyond that, a field where some kind of crop is just starting to sprout in neat, orderly rows. It's beautiful in a very stark and lonely kind of way, and also completely terrifying when you stop to realize just how isolated you are from everything you've ever known. The closest town could be days away from here. There are no hospitals, no grocery stores, no indoor plumbing, and certainly no electricity. It's just you, your family, and the unforgiving forces of nature. A man comes out of the sod barn, wiping his hands on his pants. He's wearing a wide-brimmed hat that's seen better days, not the fancy Stetson you might have pictured in your mind. His face is weathered and tanned, with a beard that seems to be more the result of not having time to shave than any kind of fashion statement. There is absolutely nothing of the dashing cowboy about him. He just looks tired, dirty, and much older than his actual years. Thought you'd sleep the day away, he calls out, but there's no real bite in his voice. Just a sense of weary resignation and maybe a little bit of amusement. The cow's been milked. You can get started on the chicken feed and water. You just nod, not really sure what else to do, and start walking toward the chicken coop. As you walk, your boots, which are indeed too small, begin to create blisters almost instantly. The chickens watch you with suspicious, beady little eyes as you step into their small domain. They are scrawny-looking things, nothing at all like the plump, well-fed birds you'd find in a modern grocery store, but they lay eggs. And out here on the frontier, that makes them as valuable as gold. You have no idea what you're supposed to do, but you spot a bucket filled with what looks like cornmeal mixed with kitchen scraps sitting near the door. You scatter it on the ground, and the chickens swarm on it like a pack of tiny, feathered velociraptors. Not all at once, you dolt, your father's voice says from right behind you. That's got to last them the whole day. Small amounts in the morning and at night. Great. You've been on the frontier for less than an hour and you're already failing at the most basic survival tasks. Sorry, you mumble, stepping back as he shows you the proper amount of feed to give the chickens. And get the eggs while you're in there, he adds, turning to walk away and attend to some other chore on his endless list. Eggs, right. You notice a few nests built into the wall of the coop, and sure enough, you can see there are eggs inside them. You reach for one and are immediately met with a vicious peck on your hand from an indignant hen who clearly wasn't finished with her business. Ouch. You snatch your hand back, now sporting a small but surprisingly painful wound. The hen glares at you, deeply offended by your rude intrusion. You got to check if she's still sitting first. Your mother calls from the doorway of the soddy, shaking her head in dismay. Lord, help us. It's like you've never collected an egg in your life. That's because you haven't. Not in this century, at least. Eventually, with a lot of guidance shouted at you from across the yard, you manage to gather 6 eggs without getting injured again. This is apparently a miracle, as your mother seems genuinely surprised by the haul. 6. That's a good morning, she says, taking them from you with great care. We'll have 2 for breakfast, trade 2 in town the next time your paw goes, and we'll save 2 for setting. 6 eggs are considered a form of wealth out here. This really puts your modern life into a sharp new perspective. Breakfast, when it's finally served, is nothing like the hearty, sprawling frontier meals you've seen in the movies. There's a thin porridge made from cornmeal, cooked until it has a paste-like consistency. A single egg is divided among the 3 of you, and there's coffee that's so weak it's essentially just brown-tinted water, but it's still treated like a precious nectar. There's no sugar and no cream. Those are luxuries that are saved only for very special occasions. Got any bacon? You ask with a hopeful tone, your stomach still rumbling despite the porridge. Your parents just exchange a look that's somewhere between amusement and genuine concern. Bacon, your father repeats. In May, we slaughtered the pig back in November. We smoked what we could, but the last of that went into April's stew pot. There'll be no bacon until next winter comes around. This is truly a waking nightmare. After breakfast, your father lays out the day's work for you. There's a field that needs plowing, seeds that have to be planted, wood that needs to be chopped, water to be hauled all the way from the creek, and about a dozen other tasks that all need to be finished before the sun goes down. The list is completely overwhelming, especially when you consider the primitive tools they have to work with. There are no tractors, no power tools, not even what you'd consider proper shovels, just hand-forged implements that look like they belong in a museum. And watch for Indians, he adds casually. I saw signs of Sioux passing through here yesterday. They're probably just hunting, but you should keep your eyes open. Right. Go ahead and add a potential conflict with displaced indigenous peoples to your growing list of worries. Although history has often twisted these interactions, many encounters were actually peaceful trades or simply cautious observation from both sides. The tensions created by white settlement on native lands, however, were very real. The work is absolutely backbreaking. Within an hour, your hands are covered in blisters, your muscles are screaming in agony, and you're drenched in sweat despite the cool morning air. Modern life has in no way prepared you for this level of intense physical labor. There are no breaks, no weekends off, no vacation days on the frontier. There is just an endless cycle of work, driven by the simple and urgent need to survive. Water comes from the creek, carried in heavy wooden buckets that dig painfully into your palms with every step you take. It's silty and probably full of bacteria, but it's all you have to drink. Your mother boils some of it for drinking and cooking, but washing is done with unboiled water because fuel is far too precious to waste on something like cleanliness. By midday, you finally understand why the people in old frontier photographs always look so grim. Who would have the energy to smile when every single aspect of your survival requires constant, grinding labor? Lunch is more cornmeal. This time it's been made into a dense, heavy bread and served with a thin soup that has a few unidentifiable vegetables floating around in it. Once again, you eat every last bite. You suddenly understand why wasting food was considered a sin. When every single calorie you consume requires hours of hard work to produce, you don't dare leave anything behind on your plate. The afternoon brings a whole new set of challenges with it. A wheel on the plow breaks, which forces your father to improvise a repair using whatever materials he can find on hand. A chicken goes missing, likely snatched up by a fox or a hawk. Dark clouds begin to gather on the horizon, promising rain that could be either a blessing or a curse, depending on how much of it falls and how quickly it comes down. Might be a gully washer coming, your father says, looking up at the sky with a worried expression. Better get the animals in and secure what we can. A severe storm on the open prairie is no laughing matter. With no buildings taller than your soddy for miles in any direction, you're essentially living inside of a lightning rod. And if the rain is heavy enough, your sod roof could literally melt away, causing the entire structure to collapse in on you. As you help herd the chickens into their coop and lead the cow into her stall in the sod barn, you realize just how fragile life is out here. There's no one to call for help, no emergency services, no infrastructure to fall back on at all. It's just you, your wits, and whatever resources you've managed to scrape together. The first fat drops of rain begin to fall as you dash back to the soddy. Inside, your mother is already placing buckets under all the known leaks in the roof. The interior of the house grows dark as the storm clouds block out the sun, and she lights a precious candle. This is another item that's too valuable to waste, but it's become necessary now. Get the quilt off the bed, she tells you. Hang it there by the door to keep the draft out. You do as you're told, and you notice how the packed earth floor of the soddy is already starting to turn muddy near the doorway where rain is blowing inside. The smell of wet earth gets stronger, and somewhere deep in the walls, you can hear the scurrying of what must be mice, or possibly something larger, seeking shelter from the storm. The rain hammers down on the sod roof, creating a strange, muffled drumming sound. Water starts to drip in new places, and soon there are more leaks than you have buckets for. Your mother seems completely unfazed, simply moving the buckets to catch the worst of the drips and letting the others fall where they may. "It ain't the first time we've been rained on inside our own house," she says with a simple shrug. "And it won't be the last." Your father comes in, soaked to the bone and tracking mud everywhere. He takes off his dripping hat and coat, hanging them near the stove to dry. "The creek's rising," he reports. "If it keeps coming down like this, we might have to move to higher ground tonight." The casual way he talks about possibly abandoning your home to floodwaters is absolutely chilling. This is just life on the frontier. It's a constant adaptation to threats that could destroy everything you've worked so hard for in the blink of an eye. The storm rages for hours, bringing with it lightning that makes the hair on your arms stand on end and thunder that seems to shake the very ground beneath you. Through it all, your parents remain completely calm, going about their necessary indoor tasks like mending clothes and repairing tools. Their resilience is both incredibly impressive and deeply sobering. Finally, as evening starts to set in, the storm begins to let up. Your father ventures back outside to check on the animals and see what damage has been done. He returns with mixed news. The chicken coop held up. The barn's got a partial collapse on the north side, but the cows fine. The garden's flooded, but it might drain off if the rain stays away for a while. He takes off his hat, releasing a small cascade of water onto the already damp floor. "The creek's high, but it's not rising anymore. I think we can stay put for the night." Dinner is a repeat of lunch: cornmeal bread and thin soup. Though this time, your mother adds a few precious pinches of salt for a little extra flavor. The food is bland, but it's filling, and you're surprised by how good it tastes after a full day of physical labor. Hunger, as it turns out, really is the best seasoning. After dinner, there's still more work to be done. Items that were dampened by the leaking roof need to be dried out. The floor needs to be raked to help it dry faster. Plans have to be made for how to repair the barn tomorrow. On the frontier, the workday doesn't just end when the sun goes down. With no electricity, the darkness brings a profound change to the household. The single candle provides only a meager amount of light, barely enough to see the faces of the people across the small room. Your mother takes advantage of the light to do some mending, her fingers working more by touch than by sight as she repairs a tear in your father's shirt. "Read us something," she asks him, and he nods, reaching for the Bible that sits on the shelf. This, you realize, is what entertainment is on the frontier. There's no television, no internet, no books, except for perhaps a Bible, an almanac, and maybe a few other precious volumes brought with them from back east. Stories, songs, and conversation are the only diversions they have after the sun disappears. Your father reads by the flickering candlelight, his voice steady and calm as he recites familiar passages. You notice how both he and your mother have the words nearly memorized, nodding along or sometimes speaking in unison at certain verses. This book isn't just a religious text to them. It is their literature, their comfort, and one of their very few connections to the wider world. As the reading goes on, You find your eyelids growing heavy, despite the hard day you've had, and the even harder one that surely awaits you tomorrow. The physical exhaustion of frontier life is catching up to you, and even the prospect of returning to that bug-infested straw mattress isn't enough to keep you awake. Your mother notices your head starting to droop. "Off to bed with you," she says, not unkindly. "Dawn comes early, and there's twice the work to do tomorrow with all the storm damage." You stumble over to your bed, too tired to even take off your clothes beyond kicking off your boots. As you lie down on the rustling straw, you realize something profound. The romanticized Wild West of the movies and books is a complete fantasy. The reality was this: endless work, constant danger, and the most basic, fundamental struggle for survival. The settlers who tamed this frontier weren't gunslingers or heroes in the way we usually think of them. They were ordinary people who were facing extraordinary hardship with a stubborn and unwavering determination. Their heroism wasn't found in shootouts at high noon, but in the simple act of getting up before dawn, day after day, to wrestle a living from an unforgiving land with inadequate tools and no safety net to catch them if they fell. As sleep begins to take you, you can hear your parents speaking softly by the dying candlelight. "Think the wheat will make it?" your mother asks. "It has to," your father replies simply. We've got nothing else to fall back on. That is the reality of the Wild West. Not adventure and romance, but the constant, nagging question of whether you'll have enough food to survive until the next season. The stakes weren't fame and glory. They were life and death. You drift off to sleep with a newfound appreciation for the pioneers who settled the American frontier, and a profound sense of gratitude that you'll wake up tomorrow in your comfortable 21st century bed, with running water, electricity, and no leaking sod roof anywhere in sight. Outside the soddy, the vast prairie stretches out under a sky that is now clear of storms. The stars are brilliantly visible in a way they never are in our light-polluted modern cities. It's breathtakingly beautiful and also completely indifferent to the tiny human struggles that are happening down below it. The wind whispers through the tall grass, and somewhere far in the distance, a wolf howls. This is the true Wild West, beautiful, brutal, and utterly unlike the myth. A place where survival itself was a victory, and where people discovered the outer limits of their own endurance every single day. The last thing you hear before sleep takes you completely is your father banking the fire in the stove. He carefully preserves every last precious coal for tomorrow's cooking. In that one simple act is everything you need to know about life on the frontier. The constant conservation of resources, the careful planning for tomorrow, and the deep understanding that any kind of waste could mean the difference between survival and disaster. As the wind whistles through the cracks in the sod walls, you realize that the most dangerous outlaws on the frontier weren't men with guns. They were starvation, disease, the weather, and isolation. And the greatest heroes weren't the ones who won the shootouts, but the ones who managed to create some small measure of security and comfort in a land that offered neither. Tomorrow will bring a whole new set of challenges: repairing storm damage, tending to the crops, caring for the animals, and the 100 other tasks that are necessary for survival. But for now, there's the blessed relief of sleep, however uncomfortable the bed might be. On the frontier, Even your rest is earned through the sweat of the day's labor. And so ends your first day in the real Wild West. Not with a gunfight or a heroic last stand, but with the quiet triumph of having simply survived until sundown. Out here, sometimes that's victory enough. The rooster's crow might as well be a fire alarm for how quickly it jolts you from sleep. Your eyes flutter open to the same dirt ceiling, the same earthy smell, and the same aching body. Now with the exciting addition of new sores from yesterday's unaccustomed labor. For one brief, beautiful moment, you think that maybe it was all just a dream. But no, you're still here in 1875, lying on a straw mattress in a house made of dirt, about to face another grueling day of frontier survival. Your mother is already up and about, stoking the fire in the cook stove. The thin gray light filtering through the oiled paper window tells you it's barely dawn. About time, she says, noticing your open eyes. We've got a heap of work to do before breakfast, and we're running low on just about everything. You sit up, wincing at the deep stiffness in your muscles. Yesterday's storm has left the Sadi's floor damp and muddy in several spots. A slug is slowly making its way across one of the walls, leaving a glistening, slimy trail behind it. "Homie, what do you mean we're running low?" you ask, pulling on the same dirty clothes you wore yesterday. Your mother gives you a look that's part concern and part pure exasperation. Did you hit your head in that storm? We're low on flour, salt, coffee, just about everything that isn't cornmeal. Your pa's riding into town today, but he can't carry much back with him on just one horse. The reality of the frontier food supply hits you like a ton of bricks. There's no Amazon delivery, no grocery store just down the street. The nearest town might be a full day's ride from here, and you can only bring back what you can fit in your saddlebags or a small wagon, assuming you can even afford to buy anything in the first place. What about breakfast? Your stomach growls, reminding you of how little you actually ate yesterday. Eggs and cornmeal mush again. We save the flour for trading. So much for pancakes or toast. The frontier diet is repetitive out of pure necessity. You eat what you have, not what you want. Outside, the morning is cool and misty. The storm has passed, leaving puddles scattered across the yard and a fresh, clean smell hanging in the air. Your father is already hard at work repairing the damaged barn wall, hammering salvaged planks of wood over the collapsed section. "Fetch water," he calls out when he sees you. The creek should be running clear by now. The wooden yoke he hands you is designed to carry 2 buckets at once, one hanging from each end, balanced across your shoulders. It looks simple enough in theory, but in reality, it's a neck-straining, shoulder-crushing instrument of pure torture. You grab 2 wooden buckets and start making your way toward the creek. The walk is only about a quarter of a mile, but with the muddy ground sucking at your boots with every step, it feels much, much longer. When you finally reach the creek, you see that your father was being optimistic. The water is still brown and swollen from yesterday's heavy rain. Standing on the slippery bank, you dip 1 bucket into the rushing current. The force of the water nearly yanks it from your grasp, and you almost go tumbling in right after it, your heart pounding in your chest. You manage to fill both buckets, though water sloshes over the sides as you struggle to lift them. The yoke balances awkwardly across your shoulders. The full weight of the water makes your knees want to buckle. How did people do this every single day? By the time you make it halfway back to the Sadi, Your shoulders are screaming in protest, and water has sloshed out with every unsteady step, soaking your pants and your boots. Your mother meets you at the door, taking one look at your struggle and letting out a sigh. Put it down before you drop it. We'll need more than that, but you can rest a minute first. Inside, she explains the water situation to you. We need drinking water, cooking water, washing water, and water for all the animals. The creek water is fine for most things, but the water for drinking and cooking needs to be settled and then boiled. She shows you how to put a little bit of alum in the water to help the silt settle to the bottom. Then you have to strain it through a cloth. The resulting liquid is clearer, but it still has a brownish tint that would send modern health departments into a complete panic. We'll boil this batch for drinking, she says, pouring some of it into a large kettle on the stove. The rest is for washing up and for the garden. You make 3 more trips to the creek, and each one is a grueling test of your endurance. By the final journey, your shoulders have been rubbed raw from the yoke, and your arms feel like they might just detach from your body. The idea of simply turning a tap to get instant water has never seemed more miraculous. Back at the soddy, your mother has breakfast ready. The promised cornmeal mush with a single egg stirred into it, and a cup of coffee so weak it's basically just hot brown water. Still, after the ordeal of hauling all that water, it tastes like a feast. Your pa's headed to town, she says as you eat. We need to get some food put by while he's gone. The storm damaged more than we thought. Put by, you ask. Set aside, preserved. Ain't you never listened to a single word I said growing up? She asks, shaking her head. The storm knocked down half the garden fence. The rabbits got in and had themselves a feast on all the young greens. We need to salvage what's left and find whatever else we can to supplement our food. After breakfast, she leads you to what's left of the garden. Sure enough, the crude fence made of branches and twine has collapsed on one side, and many of the tender young seedlings have been nibbled down to nubs. The rabbits got the lettuce and most of the peas, she says, surveying the damage. But the potatoes are still good underground, and they didn't care much for the onions. Thank the Lord. She hands you a rough-looking basket. Dig up what onions look ready and gather any dandelion greens you see. We'll make do with what we have. Foraging, you quickly learn, is a critical skill on the frontier. Your mother points out edible plants that you would have walked right past without a second thought. There are wild onions, dandelion greens, something she calls lamb's quarters, and even some early berries that are growing in a sunny patch of land. Nothing is wasted, and every single edible thing is collected with the same care you might give to nuggets of gold. Folks can starve with food growing all around them, she explains, expertly identifying the different plants. The Indians taught the first settlers what they could eat, but most folks nowadays have forgotten all that. Your grandma showed me, and now I'm showing you. The foraging expedition takes you to the edge of your property, where a small stand of trees grows near the creek. Here, your mother spots some mushrooms growing on a fallen log. These are safe, she says, picking the whitish fungi from the rotting wood. Those ones over there will kill you dead in a matter of hours. You got to know the difference. You make a mental note to never, ever eat wild mushrooms without an expert guide. Frontier medicine isn't exactly equipped to handle poisonings. Back at the soddy, you watch as your mother takes inventory of their food stores. It's a sobering sight. a small barrel that's half full of cornmeal, a cloth sack with maybe 5 pounds of flour in it, a jar of molasses that's mostly empty, a small wooden box of salt, a few strings of dried vegetables hanging from the rafters, some mysterious dried meat in a cloth sack, and that's about it. We'll need to make a stew with what we've gathered, she decides, and I'll start a batch of sourdough. The flour's low, but we've still got the starter. She shows you a small crock that's kept near the stove, containing a bubbling, sour-smelling mixture. This, you learn, is sourdough starter, a living culture of wild yeast and bacteria that leavens bread without the need for commercial yeast. It's one of the frontier's most valuable possessions, often brought all the way from back east and maintained for generations. Your great-grandma brought this starter with her over the Oregon Trail, she says with a tone of reverence. We've been keeping it alive for nearly 30 years now. The idea that your fictional frontier family has maintained the same living organism for decades, feeding it regularly with precious flour and water, and carefully preserving it through moves and disasters, speaks volumes about their priorities. While your mother is working with the sourdough, you're sent to check the traps that your father apparently set before he left for town. This involves walking the perimeter of the property and checking small wire contraptions that are hidden in the tall grass. The first 2 traps are empty, but the third one contains a rabbit, which is now very dead and very real. This isn't a cute cartoon bunny or a pet store rabbit. It's a wild animal that's been caught for food, and someone needs to deal with it. That someone, unfortunately, appears to be you. You carry the trap back to the soddy, trying not to look directly at the lifeless creature inside. Your mother takes one look at your face and almost cracks a smile. Never cleaned a rabbit before, she asks, already knowing the answer. Well, today's your day to learn. What follows is a graphic lesson in frontier food preparation that would horrify most modern sensibilities. The rabbit is strung up, skinned, gutted, and prepared for cooking with brisk efficiency. Your mother wastes absolutely nothing. Even the organs are set aside for specific uses, and the fur is carefully preserved for later tanning. Blood makes good fertilizer for the garden, she explains, catching the drips in a bowl, and the bones will go in the stock pot. You can't waste a single thing out here. By midday, a pot of what your mother calls prairie stew is simmering on the stove. It contains the rabbit, wild onions, dandelion greens, a few precious potatoes, and the foraged mushrooms, all swimming in a broth made from water and a pinch of salt. The smell is surprisingly appetizing, especially given the graphic preparation you just witnessed. Your stomach growls in anticipation. It won't be ready for hours yet, your mother warns. A good stew needs time. Meanwhile, we've got some preserving to do. She brings out a wooden bucket you haven't seen before. Inside are several fish, apparently caught by your father before he left for town. These also need to be cleaned and preserved. We'll smoke some and salt the rest, she decides. The smokehouse needs repair after the storm, so we'll have to use the chimney for now. The next few hours are devoted to food preservation. It's one of the most critical skills for frontier survival. Without any refrigeration, keeping food from spoiling is a constant challenge that requires multiple different techniques. You help hang thin strips of fish on strings near the chimney, where the smoke from the cookstove will help to preserve them. Other pieces are packed in precious salt and stored away in a crockery jar. The rabbit's skin is stretched on a frame to dry, and even the rabbit's feet are saved. Good luck, your mother explains, though you suspect they have a more practical use that she's not mentioning. In the fall, we'll do this with everything we can get our hands on, she explains. We smoke the meat, dry the fruit, pickle the vegetables, whatever it takes to get us through the winter. The concept of winter food storage takes on a whole new meaning when you realize there are no grocery stores to fall back on. You either preserve enough food during the abundant seasons, or you starve when the snow starts to fly. By mid-afternoon, your mother judges the stew to be ready. She ladles generous portions into wooden bowls, adding a piece of sourdough bread on the side. The bread isn't what you'd recognize from a modern bakery. It's dense, slightly gray from the unrefined flour, and it has a distinctly sour smell. But after a morning of hard work, it's absolutely irresistible. The stew is surprisingly good, rich, and flavorful. Despite the simple ingredients, the rabbit tastes nothing like chicken, despite the modern cliché. It has a stronger, gamier flavor that takes some getting used to. But it's protein, and out here, that's what matters most. Save some room, your mother advises as you reach for a second helping. This food needs to last, and we don't know when your pa will be back with more supplies. This constant calculation, how much to eat now versus how much to save for later, is yet another aspect of frontier life that never makes it into the romanticized tales. Every single meal is a strategic decision, balancing your immediate hunger against your future needs. After the meal, your mother carefully stores the leftover stew in a covered pot. Without refrigeration, it won't last long, especially as the day starts to warm up. Tomorrow's breakfast, you realize, will likely be reheated stew if it hasn't spoiled overnight. We need to check the root cellar. She says the last storm might have flooded it. The root cellar turns out to be a small, dark hole dug into the ground behind the soddy, reinforced with scavenged wood and covered with a slanted door. It's the frontier equivalent of a refrigerator, a naturally cool space where food can be stored for longer than it would last in the warm soddy. When your mother pulls open the door, your heart sinks. Several inches of muddy water cover the floor of the cellar, and the few potatoes and preserved goods that were stored there are now partially submerged. Damn it all, she mutters, forgetting her propriety in the face of this disaster. This is bad. Real bad. Together, you bail out the water using a bucket and then assess the damage. Some of the potatoes might be salvageable if they're used immediately. A jar of preserved tomatoes is still intact, its wax seal unbroken. But several other jars have either cracked or lost their seals, and their contents are now unsafe to eat. We just lost half of our emergency stores, your mother says grimly. We'd better hope your pa has some luck in town, or it's going to be some lean times ahead for us. The loss of food to spoilage, flooding, or pests was a constant threat on the frontier. A single disaster like this could wipe out months of careful preservation and storage, leaving a family vulnerable to hunger or even starvation. As you help clean up the root cellar, you notice your mother setting aside some of the questionable food items rather than just discarding them. Can we still eat those? You ask, pointing to some potatoes that have soft spots on them. We'll cut around the rot, she explains. And these ones with the sprouts, we'll plant them instead of eating them. Sometimes you have to sacrifice today's meal for next season's crop. This long-term thinking was what defined frontier survival. Every decision had to balance immediate needs against future security, and waste was the ultimate enemy. Even items that would seem spoiled to modern eyes might have salvageable parts or other secondary uses. By late afternoon, your father returns from town. His horse is loaded down with small but precious supplies. The haul is meager by modern standards. A small sack of flour, a tiny bag of sugar, some coffee beans, a few packets of seeds to replace what was lost in the garden, and a newspaper that's already 2 weeks old. Prices are up again, he reports grimly. The flour's nearly double what it was last fall. I could only get £5 for what we had to trade. The economics of frontier life were brutal. Without cash, most transactions were based on barter, trading things like eggs, butter, or homemade items for store-bought necessities. The values of these items fluctuated wildly based on scarcity, and distant events like wars or railroad strikes could cause local prices to skyrocket. Any news? Your mother asks, carefully storing away the new supplies. The Sioux are restless up north. The railroad's hearing for track work south of here, and the Morgans lost their oldest boy to a fever. He delivers these items of news, potential war, job opportunities, and a neighbor's death in the same matter-of-fact tone. Each is just another fact of life on the frontier. The newspaper is treated like a valuable resource, not just for the news it contains, but for its practical uses. After your father reads it aloud during supper, which is another serving of the rabbit stew, now with fresh sourdough bread, the paper will be used for everything from wrapping food to serving as toilet paper in the outhouse. Nothing is ever wasted. The conversation at supper centers around their food supplies and their plans. Your father reports that the general store was low on almost everything, with a supply wagon not expected to arrive for another 2 weeks. This means they'll have to stretch their existing food even further. We'll set more traps, he decides. And tomorrow, we'll take the wagon down to the creek. There might be some catfish in there after that rain. The constant focus on securing food is striking. Unlike in modern life, where getting food might take up a couple of hours a week at the grocery store, frontier families spent the majority of their time producing, gathering, preserving, and preparing food. It was their primary occupation, and it superseded almost everything else. After supper, you help with the cleanup, learning yet another frontier food lesson. Nothing edible is ever thrown away. The few spoonfuls of leftover stew are carefully stored. The sourdough starter is fed with a small amount of the precious flour and water. Even the water used to wash the bowls is saved to water the recovering plants in the garden. As darkness falls, your father reads from the newspaper by the light of a single candle, sharing news from the wider world. There's talk of politics in Washington, Indian wars on the plains, and the expansion of the railroad. It's strange to hear these historical events being discussed as current news, with no one having any idea of how they'll ultimately turn out. The day's work has left you completely exhausted, and you find yourself nodding off despite the early hour. The physical demands of frontier life, hauling water, gardening, and preserving food, have drained your energy completely. The idea of staying up late is ludicrous when you know that dawn will bring another full day of labor. Before you retire to your straw mattress, you take a moment to reflect on what you've learned. Food on the frontier isn't just sustenance. It's security, it's currency, and it's a constant source of concern. The precariousness of the food supply shaped every single aspect of their daily lives, from their work schedules to their social interactions. The pioneers weren't just surviving from one day to the next. They were constantly planning seasons ahead, balancing their immediate needs against their future security. As you drift off to sleep, your muscles aching from unaccustomed labor and your stomach surprisingly full despite the limited fare, you realize that the Hollywood depictions of frontier life rarely show this side of Western settlement. The daily, unglamorous work of food production doesn't make for exciting cinema, but it was the true test of a person's character on the frontier. It was the persistence to plant, harvest, hunt, and preserve day after day, season after season, with absolutely no guarantee of success. Your mother's voice drifts from across the soddy, where she sits mending by candlelight. If the weather holds, we'll pick wild strawberries tomorrow and make a preserve if we find enough. Even at the end of the day, her mind is still on food acquisition and preservation. This constant vigilance, this perpetual awareness of hunger as a lurking threat, was what defined frontier existence in ways that modern people can hardly imagine. Outside, a coyote howls in the distance. Inside the soddy, the fire in the cookstove burns low, carefully banked to preserve the coals for the morning. On your straw mattress, uncomfortably aware of the rustling that suggests you're not alone in your bedding, you close your eyes and try not to think about tomorrow's work. This is the real Wild West. Not shootouts and stagecoach robberies, but the quiet heroism of people who wrested food from an unforgiving land and survived through their ingenuity, their knowledge, and their sheer determination. Their daily victories weren't marked with notches on their six-shooters, but with full storerooms, preserved harvests, and families that made it through another harsh winter. Sleep comes quickly, your body finally surrendering to exhaustion. The last thing you hear is your mother softly humming a tune as she works, a gentle reminder that even in this harsh existence, there's still room for small moments of peace. Then the darkness takes you, and the frontier day ends just as it began, with the promise of more work tomorrow, more challenges to face, and the ever-present question of where the next meal will come from. Morning arrives with the crowing of the rooster and the familiar ache in your limbs. You've survived 2 days on the frontier, which feels like a significant achievement given all the challenges. Your family's sod house is still standing. You've learned the basics of water collection and food preparation, and you haven't been bitten by anything too dangerous, at least not yet. Today brings a new reality check about frontier life, and that is the economics of survival. Back in the 21st century, most people work to pay for their wants after their basic needs have been covered. But out here, in 1875, you work simply to exist. Got a letter from your uncle, your father says over a breakfast of reheated stew. The concept of eating leftover stew for breakfast would have horrified you in your previous life, but now you're just grateful for the protein. He says the mind's hearing. Good wages, $3 a day. Your mother looks up sharply. $3 in cash money, that's what he writes. Your father taps the worn piece of paper. He says they need men who can handle themselves underground. It's dangerous work, but it's steady pay. You nearly choke on your stew. $3 a day sounds like nothing in modern terms, but from the way your parents are discussing it, this is a serious amount of money. The prospect clearly both excites and worries them in equal measure. How long would you be gone? Your mother asks, her face carefully neutral. Through the harvest, at least, maybe into the winter. He doesn't meet her eyes. It would mean leaving you two to handle things here on your own. The implications of that sink in. Your father would be away for months, leaving just you and your mother to maintain the homestead. All the heavy labor, all the protection duties, and all the decisions would fall on fewer shoulders. But the promise of actual cash is clearly very tempting. How far is the mine? You ask. It's a 3-day ride west near the mountains. He folds the letter carefully. I'd need to leave by the end of the week if I'm going to go. After breakfast, your father takes you outside to check the animal traps and explain more about frontier economics. The harsh reality of it all quickly becomes clear. Most settlers lived in a state of constant debt and barter, with actual cash being a rare and precious commodity. The general store runs a tab for most folks. He explains as you walk the property boundary. You get what you need: flour, sugar, tools, and you pay with what you produce: eggs, butter, crops come harvest time. The problem is the prices never quite seem to balance out. He stops to reset an empty trap, his weathered hands working the wire mechanism with a practiced ease. The store owner sets the prices on both sides of the deal, what you buy and what you trade. And somehow you always end up owing more than you bring in. There's no bitterness in his voice, just resignation. It's been that way since we got here 3 years ago. And the debt just keeps growing. The trap is set. You continue walking. A rabbit bounds away as you approach, too quick for any hope of catching it. That mine job, you let the question hang in the air. Cash means freedom, he says simply. Cash means paying down the debt at the store. Maybe buying some lumber for a proper house before the winter sets in. Cash means not having to wonder if the store owner will cut us off when our debt gets too high. The idea of being cut off sends a chill down your spine. In a place with no social safety net, no food banks, and no government assistance, being denied credit at the general store could be a death sentence if your own food production failed. At midday, a neighbor arrives. He's the first visitor you've seen since you arrived in this strange frontier reality. He rides up on a horse that's seen better days, leading a second animal that's pulling a small cart. The man himself is thin to the point of being gaunt, with a beard that's streaked with gray and clothes that have been patched so many times they're more repair than original fabric. "Afternoon, Thomas," your father greets him. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Trade day," the man Thomas replies, climbing stiffly down from his horse. "Sarah's got some butter she thought your missus might want, and I heard you might have some eggs to spare." This, you realize, is frontier commerce in action. There are no stores, no cash, just neighbors trading their surplus goods to fill each other's needs. Your mother emerges from the soddy, wiping her hands on her apron, and the two women immediately fall into negotiations over the butter and eggs, while the men talk about crops and the weather. The bargaining is subtle but intense. Every egg, every pound of butter has real value when you consider the amount of labor that went into producing it. There's no fixed exchange rate, just a mutual understanding of their relative worth, influenced by need, quality, and their relationship with each other. 3 eggs for half a pound of butter seems fair, your mother eventually decides. The trade is made, with both women seemingly satisfied with the deal. Thomas has other news to share as well. The railroad's hearing about 10 miles south of here, building a spur line to the new cattle yards. $2 a day, they say. Another job opportunity, another potential source of that precious cash. Your father nods thoughtfully, but he doesn't commit either way. After Thomas leaves, your parents have a quiet, intense discussion about the various work options. The mine pays better, but it's more dangerous and further away. The railroad is closer, but it offers less money. Staying on the homestead means they'll have to continue scraping by on barter and credit, but it keeps the family together and their claims secure. What happens if we leave the homestead unworked? You ask, genuinely curious about frontier property rights. Your father looks grim. Claim jumpers. The government too. The Homestead Act says we need to improve the land for 5 years to get the title. If you leave it for too long and someone reports it as abandoned, we lose everything. The precariousness of frontier property ownership is yet another reality check. Without a regular presence and work, a family could lose their entire investment of time and labor. The land itself has no value without the improvements, the cleared fields, the buildings, the fences, that represent years of back-breaking work. In the afternoon, your father takes you to check on the crops, or what's left of them after the storm damage. Walking through the fields, he explains the economics of frontier farming in terms that would make a modern accountant weep. I put in 5 bushels of seed wheat this spring, he says, looking over the green shoots that are just beginning to grow. If the weather holds and the locusts stay away, we might get 30 bushels at harvest. We'll keep 5 for next year's seed, use 10 for our own flour, and sell the rest to the mill for maybe 50 cents a bushel. You do the quick math in your head. 15 bushels at 50 cents each would yield $7.50 for an entire season's work. That's less than 3 days' wages at the mine your uncle mentioned. Why farm at all then, you ask? Why not just work for wages? Your father gives you a look that suggests this is a question only a fool or someone raised with no understanding of frontier realities would ask. Wages can stop. A company can fold. A mine can collapse. He gestures at the field. The land feeds you no matter what, as long as you work it right. It might not make you rich, but you won't starve if the jobs dry up. This fundamental reality that self-sufficiency was the only true security was what shaped the mindset of the frontier settlers. Cash work was a supplement to, not a replacement for, the subsistence farming that kept them alive. As the afternoon wears on, another visitor arrives. This one is less welcome. A man in a dusty black coat rides up. His horse is much better fed than Thomas's was. Without dismounting, he hands your father a folded piece of paper. Tax assessment. He announces it's due by the end of the summer. The county's building a new courthouse. After he rides away, your father unfolds the paper and his face darkens. $2.40, he mutters. Where in the hell are we supposed to get that? The tax bill, a paltry sum by modern standards, represents another economic pressure on the frontier family. With very little cash income, even small government levies could be devastating. And unlike in modern times, tax collection on the frontier could be brutally direct. If you failed to pay, you might lose your livestock, your tools, or even your land. We could sell the cow, your mother suggests, without much enthusiasm, having joined the conversation. Your father shakes his head. Without the milk and butter, we'll just end up deeper in debt at the store. I might have to take that mine job after all. By evening, the economic reality of frontier life has become painfully clear. Your family is caught in multiple binds. They need cash for taxes and their store debt, but they're reliant on subsistence farming for their basic survival. They want to improve their situation with a proper house, but they can't afford the lumber without wage work that would take your father away from the homestead. They theoretically own their land through the Homestead Act, but they're constantly at risk of losing it if they can't meet the payment or improvement requirements. The romantic notion of pioneers as independent settlers, beholden to no one, has completely evaporated. The reality is a complex web of debts, obligations, and vulnerable legal claims that keep frontier families in a state of perpetual economic insecurity. Supper is simple: more sourdough bread, the last of the stew, and some dandelion greens your mother collected. The food reflects their economic reality. You eat what you can produce or forage. You save what little money you have for the absolute necessities that can't be made at home. After the meal, your father takes out a slate and a piece of pencil, paper being too precious to waste on calculations, and begins to work through the family's economic situation. The figures are sobering. A store debt of nearly $15, a property tax of $2.40, the need for seed for the next season, and essential supplies for the winter. The total amount needed far exceeds any realistic projection of what the farm might produce in tradable surplus. The mine it is, he finally decides. I'll leave on Saturday. I should be able to work for 4 months before the snow gets too deep for travel. I might be able to clear $40, maybe $50 if I'm careful. Your mother just nods, her face revealing little of what must be a storm of emotions at the prospect of her husband leaving for a third of the year. I'll start getting your things ready. This pattern of men leaving for wage work while the women maintained the homestead was common on the frontier. It created a strange dual economy, with the men engaged in cash labor while the women managed the subsistence production that kept their families alive. Both were essential, but the work was sharply divided along gender lines. The next morning brings a new type of frontier work experience. A neighbor arrives, a broad-shouldered man named Miller, with the news that his barn raising is scheduled for the following week. We could use every hand we can get, he tells your father. I've got the Johnsons and the Petersons committed already. I thought your boy here might be able to help, too. He nods in your direction. Barn raisings were one of the few examples of communal labor on the otherwise individualistic frontier. Neighbors would gather together to help construct a building that would be impossible for a single family to manage on their own. The work wasn't paid in cash, but it operated on a principle of reciprocity. You help your neighbors, and they help you when your turn comes. We'll be there, your father promises. It might be the last big job I do before I head off to the mines. Miller's expression shifts slightly at the mention of the mines. I heard they had a collapse last month. 3 men didn't come out. Your father nods grimly. I heard the same. but they're paying cash and the tax man won't take eggs or wheat. After Miller leaves, you help with the day's chores, now familiar enough with the routine to work without needing constant direction. You're hauling water, feeding the animals, checking the traps, and weeding what remains of the garden. The labor never ends, but at least you're starting to develop calluses to replace the blisters on your hands as you work. Your father explains more about frontier economics. Land is the only real wealth out here, he says, pausing to wipe the sweat from his brow. If you get enough acres under cultivation, eventually, you can hire labor instead of doing it all yourself. That's the dream, to become a landowner instead of just a worker. But that dream, you realize, was only attainable for a lucky few. Most settlers remained caught in the cycle of subsistence and debt, working their small claims and supplementing their income with wage labor when it was necessary. The Jeffersonian ideal of a nation of independent yeoman farmers collided with the harsh economic realities of frontier capitalism. By midday, another visitor arrives. This one is unexpected and unwelcome. A man in a suit that's far too fine for frontier conditions rides up on a horse that's clearly well-fed and well-groomed. Without even greeting you, he surveys your family's modest homestead with obvious disdain. Reynolds, your father, acknowledges him coldly. What brings the bank all the way out here? The man, Reynolds, produces a leather folder and extracts a document from it. Just making my rounds, Mason, reminding folks of their obligations. He hands the paper to your father. The bank's called in the notes on several properties in the county. I thought you should know that yours might be next. After he rides away, your father crumples the paper in his fist, his knuckles white with anger. Vultures, he mutters, just waiting for folks to fail. This, too, was a part of frontier economics. The constant pressure from banks and speculators, who were eager to acquire land from struggling homesteaders. The homestead itself, with all the improvements made through years of hard labor, was valuable enough to attract the predatory attention of those with capital, but without the willingness to do the physical work of settlement. What happens if they call in the note? You ask, not entirely understanding the frontier banking terminology. Your father sighs. It means they demand immediate payment of the full amount we borrowed, not just the regular installments. And since nobody out here has that kind of cash just sitting around, they get to seize the property. He looks around at the modest homestead, his expression a mix of pride and worry. Everything we've built, everything we've worked for, gone. The reality of frontier financing is another shock. Many settlers took out loans to establish their homesteads for seed, tools, livestock, or supplies, with the property itself as collateral. Unlike modern mortgages with their fixed terms and regulated practices, frontier loans could be called in at the bank's discretion, often when the land had increased in value due to the settlers' improvements or when railroad development made the location more desirable. How much do we owe? You ask. $50. The sum clearly pains him to say aloud. We borrowed it when we first claimed the land. We've been paying interest on it for 3 years, but we've never been able to touch the principal amount. $50, a sum a modern person might spend on dinner without a second thought, represented an almost insurmountable debt for a frontier family. With their annual cash income measured in single digits, Paying off such a loan would take years, even under the best of circumstances. The mine job you begin might save us. If I can work the full season, and if they pay what they promise. He doesn't sound very optimistic. But plenty of men go to the mines with dreams of clearing their debts and come back with nothing if they come back at all. The afternoon brings yet another dimension of frontier economics, the peddler. A wagon arrives, driven by a cheerful man with an improbable mustache and a hat that's seen better days. The sides of his wagon fold down to reveal shelves of goods, fabrics, tools, medicines, seeds, and various trinkets. Unlike the general store in town, the peddler deals primarily in cash, though he's willing to consider certain items in trade, particularly eggs, butter, and handcrafted goods that he can sell elsewhere. His prices are higher than the stores, but he brings his goods directly to the isolated homesteads, saving the families the time and expense of a trip to town. Your mother approaches the wagon with clear interest, but also with equal caution. Got any needles? Mine's nearly worn through. The peddler produces a paper of needles. Finest Sheffield steel, 20 cents for the lot. Highway robbery, your mother mutters, but her tone lacks conviction. Good needles are essential for the constant mending that keeps frontier clothing functional. After careful consideration of the family's meager resources, she trades 2 eggs and one of her hand-knitted dishcloths for a single needle, a small cake of soap, and a packet of sugar candy. This last item is clearly intended as a special treat for you, though you've done nothing to deserve such a luxury. The peddler, his business concluded, offers news along with his goods. The railroad's pushing west faster than expected. Land prices are jumping ahead of the line. It might be worth holding on to your claim for a while longer, even with the bank making noises. This information, more valuable than any of the physical goods he carries, causes your father to reconsider his plans. If the land values are rising, perhaps taking on additional debt to hold the homestead might be worthwhile, despite the risk. As evening approaches, your family gathers for a council on their economic future. The options are limited, and they all involve significant trade-offs. Your father could take the mine job, earning cash but leaving the homestead vulnerable. He could seek work on the railroad, earning less but staying closer to home. They could sell their assets, the cow, a horse, their tools, to pay their immediate debts, but that would cripple their productive capacity. Or they could try to secure additional credit to weather the current crisis, which would deepen their long-term debt but preserve their claim. What would you do? Your father asks you directly, surprising you with the invitation to weigh in on such an important decision. The question feels impossibly heavy. Each option has potentially life-altering consequences for this frontier family. Even with your advanced knowledge from the future, you can't predict which path would ultimately prove to be the best in this uncertain environment. You hesitate, acutely aware of your own ignorance of frontier realities, despite the crash course of the last few days. I'd take the mine job. Cash seems to be what we need most right now. Your father nods slowly. That's my thinking too. It's not what I'd choose if there was a better option, but there isn't. He turns to your mother. Can you and the boy manage here? She straightens her shoulders. We'll manage. We always have. The decision made, the evening turns to preparation. Your father will leave for the mines in 3 days after helping with the neighbor's barn raising. Plans are laid for his absence. What crops will need tending? Which repairs can't wait? How will they handle potential emergencies? The conversation is practical, focused on survival, with little room for sentiment despite the months of separation that lie ahead. As darkness falls and the single candle is lit, you find yourself reflecting on what you've learned about frontier economics. The popular image of self-sufficient pioneers carving out independent lives from the wilderness has given way to a more complex reality. Homesteaders were caught in webs of debt and obligation, their independence constrained by banks, taxes, and the fundamental need to participate in larger economic systems for their very survival. The true heroes of the Western settlement weren't the lone individuals who conquered the wilderness, but the families who made impossible choices and sacrifices in pursuit of long-term security. Their struggles weren't primarily against Indians or outlaws, but against economic forces that were largely beyond their control. Whether that destroyed their crops, banks that called in their loans, and companies that paid less than they promised or folded entirely. As you prepare for sleep on your now familiar straw mattress, you find yourself grateful for the economic safety nets of modern life: unemployment insurance, consumer protection laws, and regulated banking that most people take for granted. The frontier's economic reality was a constant high-wire act with no safety net, where a single setback could mean utter ruin. Outside, the night creatures call in the darkness. Inside the soddy, your parents speak softly about their plans and their hopes. Their voices are barely audible across the small room. This, too, is the real Wild West. Not the glamour of gunfights or the freedom of the open range, but ordinary people making difficult decisions in a system that offered few good options and absolutely no guarantees. Sleep comes more easily now that your body is adapting to the physical demands of frontier life. Your last thoughts before drifting off are of the mine your father will soon enter. Dark, dangerous, and promising either salvation or disaster for this family that is hanging by a fragile economic thread. The day of the barn raising dawns bright and clear. You wake up before the rooster even crows, your body now somehow anticipating the early frontier schedule. The straw mattress still rustles with unwelcome residents, but you've almost gotten used to sharing your bed with insects. Almost. The barn raising is a community event, bringing together scattered homesteaders from miles around. By mid-morning, wagons and riders begin to arrive at the Miller property, a homestead that's slightly larger and more established than your family's, with a proper wooden house instead of a soddy. The men arrive ready for work. The women are bearing food for the communal meal that will follow, and the children are excited for the rare opportunity to play with others their own age. You note how even in the isolation of the frontier, humans still seek out community and connection. The Miller family has been preparing for weeks, cutting and preparing lumber, digging post holes, and gathering all the necessary tools. Now, with the help of their neighbors, they'll accomplish in a single day what would have taken months for one family to do alone. Your father introduces you around as the work groups form. The men size you up with quick glances, assessing your potential contribution. You're assigned to a team that's lifting the heavy support beams, where your father can keep an eye on you. The work is brutally hard, hoisting massive timbers, holding them in place while others secure the joints, and climbing to precarious heights to attach the roof supports. By midday, your muscles are screaming in protest, and sweat has soaked completely through your clothes, despite the mild temperature. This is labor of a different order than the daily chores you've experienced so far. It's sustained, intensive, and dangerous. During a brief water break, you overhear two men discussing a recent accident at a similar barn raising about 20 miles to the east. A beam slipped and caught Jensen right across the chest. One of them says quietly. He was dead before they could even lay him down. The other man nods grimly. He left a wife and 4 little ones. The community's taking up a collection for them. This casual mention of death and the matter-of-fact discussion of how the survivors will manage is yet another jarring reminder of frontier realities. In a world without safety regulations, without emergency services, and without insurance or workers' compensation, accidents were frequent and often fatal. What happens to a family if the father dies? You ask your father privately as you return to work. He doesn't sugarcoat the answer. It depends. If they've got older boys who can work the land, they might be able to keep the homestead. If not, usually the woman and the young ones go back to their family if they have any, or she'll remarry quick if she can, or they lose everything. The cold calculus of frontier survival didn't allow for long periods of grieving. A single-parent household simply couldn't manage the amount of physical labor that was required for subsistence, making a quick remarriage an economic necessity rather than a romantic choice. By mid-afternoon, the barn's frame stands complete, a testament to their communal effort and frontier engineering. Some of the men begin attaching the roof boards while others construct the walls. The women have prepared a feast that's laid out on makeshift tables, and the workers rotate through to eat in shifts. The meal is the most abundant you've seen since you arrived in this time. There's fried chicken, biscuits, cornbread, preserved fruits, and even a few pies. In a world of general scarcity, the communities would pull their resources together for special occasions, creating a temporary abundance that would be remembered during the leaner times. As you're eating, a woman nearby suddenly cries out. Her young son, who is perhaps 4 years old, has fallen and gashed his arm on a discarded tool. Blood is flowing freely from a jagged wound that clearly needs immediate attention. "Get Martha!" Someone shouts, and an older woman quickly makes her way through the gathered crowd. Martha, you soon learn, is the closest thing they have to a doctor within 20 miles. She's a midwife with knowledge of herbs and basic medical treatments. She examines the crying child with a practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound with water and applying pressure to slow the bleeding. "It needs stitching," she announces. "Someone heat a needle." What follows is frontier medicine in its rawest form. A sewing needle is held in a fire until it's glowing, and then it's threaded with ordinary sewing thread. The child is held firmly by his father while Martha makes quick, neat stitches to close the wound. There's no anesthesia, no antiseptics beyond the brief flame sterilization, and no antibiotics to prevent an infection. The boy screams throughout the entire procedure, his cries echoing across the homestead. His mother sings softly to him, her voice shaking while tears stream down her face. When it's done, Martha applies a paste of herbs and wraps the wound with a clean cloth. Keep it dry, she instructs the parents. Change the wrapping daily. If it starts to smell or he gets a fever, bring him to me immediately. The entire medical emergency has been handled in less than 15 minutes, and the work on the barn resumes almost immediately. The injured child is settled in a shady spot with a piece of candy to soothe him, and he's already being distracted by the other children who are showing him a frog they've caught. Does that happen often? You ask your mother, who has watched the proceedings with concern but not with shock. Injuries happen all the time, she replies. You learn to handle what you can, and you pray for what you can't. Martha's good with wounds and with birthing, but there's plenty of things she can't fix. The casualness with which the frontier people accepted medical emergencies and their often limited options for treatment is sobering. In a world before antibiotics, before blood transfusions, and before modern surgery and anesthesia, many conditions that would be routinely treatable in your time were potential death sentences. As the afternoon wears on, you notice a young woman who is sitting apart from the main gathering, a shawl wrapped around her despite the warm day. Her face is flushed, and she coughs occasionally into a handkerchief that comes away spotted with blood. Consumption, your mother says quietly, following your gaze. It's Miller's eldest daughter. She's been sick since the winter. Tuberculosis, or consumption as it was known in frontier terminology, was one of the most feared diseases of the era. Its wasting progression was both visible and inexorable, and the frontier treatments for it were largely ineffective. The isolation of the homesteads provided some protection against contagious diseases, but community gatherings like today's barn raising created opportunities for them to be transmitted. Is there no treatment for it? You ask, already knowing the answer, but hoping that frontier wisdom might have some solution that's unknown to the history books. Your mother shakes her head. Some say the mountain air helps. Others try all manner of tonics and treatments, but mostly it just takes who it wants. She makes a subtle sign of the cross. It's God's will. This fatalism, this acceptance of disease as inevitable and often unstoppable, was what defined the frontier attitudes toward health. Without germ theory, without effective medications, and without diagnostic tools beyond basic observation, illness was often viewed as a matter of luck or divine intervention, rather than a problem with scientific solutions. As the day progresses, you learn more about frontier health challenges through casual conversations. One woman mentions losing 3 of her children to diphtheria in a single week. A man shows you a twisted arm that never healed properly after a break. An elderly homesteader moves with the characteristic shuffle of someone who has survived a stroke, half of his face frozen in a permanent droop. Each of these stories, told matter-of-factly as part of an ordinary conversation, would represent a major medical crisis in modern times. But here, they're just the expected hazards of frontier life, accepted with the same resignation as bad weather or poor harvests. By late afternoon, the barn is substantially complete, a triumph of their communal effort. The Miller family will finish the details in the coming days, but the structure stands sound and ready for use. The celebratory spirits rise as the work winds down, with someone producing a fiddle and another a harmonica. As an impromptu dance begins, you notice Martha, the midwife and healer, now sitting with the consumptive girl, listening to her chest and mixing some herbal preparation in a cup. The contrast is striking. Joy and community celebration are happening just yards away from someone who is fighting a likely fatal illness. Your mother joins Martha briefly, and you overhear fragments of their conversation about medicinal herbs and treatments. It becomes clear that the frontier women were the primary healthcare providers for most of the families, maintaining a knowledge of plants and home remedies that had been passed down through generations. Willow bark tea for fever and pain, Martha explains to your mother, who nods seriously. A comfrey poultice for breaks and sprains. Elderberry syrup for the winter coughs. You should start preparing it now, before the berries are all gone. This exchange of medical knowledge was crucial in a world without doctors, pharmacies, or medical texts. Each woman was responsible for her own family's health care, with occasional help from more knowledgeable neighbors like Martha when it was available. As the gathering begins to disperse, with families heading home before the darkness makes travel dangerous, you help to load your family's wagon with the few tools and dishes they brought. Your muscles ache from the day's labor, and a splinter in your palm throbs painfully. It's a minor injury by frontier standards, but it's a constant reminder of how even small health issues could become major problems without proper care. The ride home is quiet, all of you exhausted from the day's work. Your father breaks the silence occasionally to point out plants with medicinal properties that are growing along the trail. This is knowledge, you realize, that might be literally life-saving in this environment. Echinacea there, he notes, indicating a purple-flowered plant. It's good for infections. And that's yarrow, it stops bleeding. Your ma knows how to prepare them. Back at your sadi, the evening routine feels almost comfortingly familiar after the social intensity of the day. As your mother prepares a simple supper, she checks your splintered hand, her touch surprisingly gentle. It needs to come out before it festers, she decides, and she proceeds to extract the splinter with a needle that she sterilized in the cooking fire. The procedure is painful but quick, and she applies a dab of some strong-smelling salve to it afterward. "What's that?" you ask, sniffing the pungent ointment. "Garlic, honey, and a few other things," she replies vaguely. "It keeps the infection away." Modern science would eventually confirm the antibacterial properties of both garlic and honey. But in 1875, such treatments were based on observation and tradition rather than laboratory testing. They worked often enough to remain in use, though their effectiveness was inconsistent by modern standards. After supper, your father announces that he'll be leaving for the mine tomorrow, instead of waiting another day as they had planned. "It's best to get there early and secure a position," he explains. The competition gets fierce when the word spreads that they're hearing. This accelerated departure creates a somber mood. The dangers of mining were well known: cave-ins, explosions, toxic gases, and long-term lung damage. And no one pretends that this is anything but a necessary risk. Your mother begins packing his few spare clothes and preparing some travel food without a word of comment, her expression carefully neutral. As darkness falls and the preparations continue, you notice your father taking your mother aside for a private conversation. Though you can't hear their words, you can guess the content. Final instructions in case he doesn't return, arrangements for the homestead's future, and perhaps even some emotional farewells that the frontier stoicism doesn't allow to be expressed openly. Later, as you lie on your straw mattress, waiting for sleep, your mother sits nearby, grinding some dried plants with a mortar and pestle by the light of the candle. The rhythmic scraping sound is oddly soothing. "I'm making some medicine for your pa to take with him," she explains, seeing your curious gaze. "The mining camps are rife with illness. Men are packed together, the food is poor, the water is bad, and there are no proper privies." She adds another dried leaf to her mixture. This might help to keep him well. The idea of sending someone into a known health hazard with only a small pouch of herbs for protection seems hopelessly inadequate, but it's all that frontier medicine can offer. There are no vaccines, no preventive antibiotics, and no sophisticated diagnostic tools, just traditional remedies and hope. As you drift towards sleep, the contrast between modern and frontier healthcare has never seemed starker. In your time, the splinter in your hand would warrant an antiseptic wipe and perhaps a bandage, with antibiotics available if an infection developed. But here, that same minor injury could potentially lead to blood poisoning and death without proper care. Your mother finishes her preparation and stores the ground herbs in a small cloth pouch, which she sets aside for tomorrow. The simple act contains all the love and concern that she cannot express directly. It's a frontier wife's attempt to protect her husband from dangers that are beyond her control. Morning comes early, as it always does. Your father is already up and dressed when you open your eyes, checking his few possessions for the journey ahead. A small pack contains his spare clothes, the herb pouch your mother prepared, some hardtack and jerky for the journey, and little else. Travel light was the rule on the frontier, especially when the destination was uncertain. Breakfast is solemn and brief. Cornmeal mush sweetened with a precious spoonful of molasses, a luxury that was saved for this occasion. No one speaks much. The impending separation hangs heavy in the air. After the meal, your father provides his final instructions. "Check the north fence line today. The storm loosened some of the posts. The traps need to be checked daily. If the Miller boy comes by with that plow part I mended, have him leave it by the barn." These practical directions stand in for the emotional farewell that the frontier culture discouraged. The men didn't speak of their feelings or their fears, even when they were facing potentially deadly work. Their stoicism wasn't just a cultural preference, but a form of psychological protection. In a world where death was commonplace, emotional walls helped people to function, despite their constant losses. As your father saddles his horse, you notice him slipping a revolver into his saddlebag, a reminder that human dangers were also a part of frontier travel. The roads between the settlements were prime territory for bandits, who knew that travelers might be carrying cash or valuable goods. The actual goodbye is brief and restrained. Your father embraces your mother quickly, and then he clasps your shoulder with a firm hand. "Take care of things," he says simply. "Be the man of the house until I get back." Then he mounts his horse and rides away without looking back, his figure growing smaller as he crosses the prairie toward the distant mountains where the mine awaits. Your mother watches until he disappears from sight, and then she turns briskly to the day's tasks, her expression giving nothing away. Well, she says practically that fence won't fix itself. We'd best get started. This, too, is a form of frontier medicine in its own way. It's the psychological adaptation that allowed people to continue functioning, despite their separation, uncertainty, and the ever-present danger. There was no time for extended grieving or worry. There was no luxury of emotional indulgence when survival required constant work. As you help with the day's chores, your mother begins to educate you more thoroughly about frontier health care. This is knowledge you'll need in your new role as the temporary man of the house. Snakebite, she says as you check the traps near a rocky outcropping. You cut across the marks with a clean knife. Then you suck out the poison and you spit it away. Then you make a poultice with plantain leaves. These ones here. She points to a common weed you would have overlooked. You bind it tight and you keep the limb below the heart. The procedure she describes is partly effective and partly dangerous by modern standards. It could potentially introduce an infection through the cut, and you risk absorbing the poison through the tissues in your mouth. But it also physically removes some of the venom through the suction. Like many frontier treatments, it was better than nothing, but it was far from ideal. The dog days are coming, she continues as you work. The August fever season. We'll need to boil all of our drinking water and cover our food from the flies. We'll sleep with the windows papered shut, no matter how hot it gets. The connection between mosquitoes and diseases like malaria wasn't yet established in frontier medicine, but observational evidence had taught the settlers that certain preventive measures could reduce the illnesses during the late summer fever season. The advice about boiling the water was particularly sound, though the full understanding of waterborne bacteria was still developing. By midday, you've learned a dizzying array of frontier medical information. How to treat burns with raw potato, how to set simple fractures with splints, which plants can stop diarrhea, and which can induce vomiting when poison has been swallowed, and how to recognize the early signs of scarlet fever, diphtheria, and measles, along with dozens of other practical remedies for common ailments. Knowledge is what keeps you alive out here, your mother explains as you pause for a simple lunch of cornbread and wild greens. The doctor's a 2-day ride away if he's even home when you get there. Most of the time, you're your own physician. The reality of frontier healthcare was largely self-sufficiency by necessity. Professional medical help was too distant, too expensive, and often not significantly more effective than the home treatments. The families developed their own medical knowledge through experience, tradition, and sometimes tragic trial and error. After lunch, your chores take you to the creek for water. While you're filling the buckets, you notice something disturbing. There are several dead fish floating near the bank, their white bellies exposed to the sun. Concerned, you report this to your mother when you return to the soddy. Her reaction is immediate and alarmed. "Don't use that water," she exclaims, dumping the buckets you've just carried all the way back. Not for drinking, not for washing, not for anything. Someone's likely dumping mine tailings upstream. Water contamination was a serious and common health threat on the frontier. Without any environmental regulations or an understanding of toxic chemicals, industrial activities like mining often poisoned the water sources that were used by the downstream settlements. The dead fish were nature's warning system, and it was one your mother was wise enough to heed. What do we do for water? You ask, suddenly aware of how dependent you are on the creek that has now become a potential threat. We've got the rain barrel from the storm, she says, thinking quickly. And the Miller place has a good well. We'll have to haul our water from there until we know that the creek is safe again. This adaptation, finding alternative water sources when the primary ones have been compromised, was yet another aspect of frontier survival. The flexibility to change their practices quickly in response to environmental threats was essential when so many dangers went unseen until they had already caused harm. By late afternoon, a new concern arises. Dark clouds are building on the horizon, and the air grows still and heavy with an unusual warmth. Your mother watches the sky with evident worry. There's a green tinge to those clouds, she observes. It could be a twister brewing. Tornadoes were particularly feared on the prairie, where the flat terrain offered no natural shelter, and the Saudis provided only minimal protection against the violent winds. Without any weather forecasting or warning systems, the settlers had to rely on observational signs and their traditional knowledge to anticipate the dangerous storms. Your mother begins her preparations immediately, sending you to secure any loose items around the homestead while she gathers their essential supplies inside the sadi. A storm lamp is filled with precious oil. The water containers are topped off, and a small bundle of their key possessions, documents, the family Bible and photographs, is placed near the door for a quick retrieval if it's necessary. If it comes to it, we head for the root cellar, she instructs. Twisters can take a sadi right off its foundation, but they can't pull up the ground itself. This emergency planning, this constant readiness for disaster, was another form of frontier health care. In a world without any emergency services or disaster relief, preparation and quick decision-making were often the only defenses they had against nature's dangers. As evening approaches, the storm blows past without developing into the feared tornado. Though the heavy rain once again tests the sadi's roof, the leaks seem to be fewer this time. The repair work you did after the previous storm has helped, but the interior still grows damp and chilly as darkness falls. Your mother builds up the fire in the cook stove, creating a welcome warmth against the dampness. We can't afford to get the ague, she explains, using the frontier term for the fever and chills that might indicate malaria or other infections. Not with your pa gone and all this work to do. This practical approach to preventive health, keeping warm and dry to avoid illness, reflected the frontier understanding that sickness wasn't just a personal misfortune, but a threat to the entire family's survival. A homestead couldn't function with its primary workers incapacitated, which made illness prevention a practical necessity rather than just a matter of comfort. Supper is simple but satisfying. Cornbread with the last of the rabbit stew, which has been reheated and extended with wild onions and some early peas that were salvaged from the garden. The meal reinforces another aspect of frontier health, the direct connection between diet and wellness that the settlers understood intuitively. Your body needs meat to stay strong, your mother says as she serves the stew, and greens to keep your blood right. That's why the winter's so hard. There's nothing fresh by February, and that's when the sickness takes hold. The seasonal nature of frontier illness, with scurvy, pneumonia, and other conditions peaking during the winter months, reflected both the biological realities of vitamin deficiency and the social conditions of being confined in small, poorly ventilated spaces during the cold weather. After supper, with the rain still pattering on the sod roof, your mother takes up her mending by the light of the lamp. The domestic scene feels almost cozy, despite the primitive conditions, creating a moment of relative peace in the otherwise harsh frontier existence. "Your pa had the marsh fever 2 summers ago," she says suddenly, her hands continuing their steady work. "He was shaking and burning up by turns. He couldn't keep any food down. I thought we were going to lose him for sure." This rare personal revelation, this acknowledgement of their past vulnerability, offers a glimpse into the emotional reality that was hidden behind the frontier stoicism. The constant proximity to death shaped their relationships and their outlook in ways that modern people can hardly imagine. What happened, you ask, drawn into this glimpse of your family's history? Martha came with her willow bark and her fever remedies. I kept cold compresses on him day and night. Her voice remains matter-of-fact, but her hands still briefly on her mending. For 7 days he burned with it, and on the 8th day the fever broke. The simple narrative contains volumes of unspoken emotion, the exhaustion of the round-the-clock care, the fear of impending loss, the desperate hope that the home remedies would be enough, and the overwhelming relief when recovery finally came. This was the lived experience of frontier illness. It was intense, personal, and utterly lacking in the clinical distance of modern healthcare. That's why we keep the willow bark dried and ready, she concludes practically, resuming her stitching. You never know when a fever will strike again. This preparedness, this constant readiness for medical emergencies, was what defined frontier healthcare. Without any access to immediate professional help, the families had to maintain their own medical supplies and knowledge, prepared for the crisis they knew would eventually come. As the evening deepens and the lamplight casts long shadows across the sodi's interior, you realize how fundamentally different the frontier health perspectives were from modern attitudes. In your time, health is often viewed as the default state, with illness being an unexpected interruption. But on the frontier, the opposite was true. Illness was expected, while continued health was the surprising blessing. Your mother finishes her mending and banks the fire for the night. Her movements are practiced and efficient. Another day of frontier life has passed, a day without modern medicine, without sanitation standards, and without health insurance, antibiotics, or emergency services. Yet people survived, adapting to the threats and developing systems of care that, while primitive by later standards, represented the best knowledge they had available at the time. As you settle onto your straw mattress, listening to the rain on the sod roof and the occasional distant rumble of thunder, you reflect on what you've learned. The healthcare challenges of frontier life weren't just about treating illnesses, but about maintaining function in the face of a constant threat. Survival required not just physical remedies, but also psychological adaptations. The stoicism, the practicality, and the focus on work despite fear or grief. Tomorrow will bring new tasks, new challenges, and potentially new health concerns. Without your father's strength and knowledge, the burden of maintaining the homestead falls more heavily on you and your mother. The work must continue, despite his absence, just as frontier life continued despite illness, injury, and loss. Outside, the storm begins to ease. The rain softens to a gentle patter. Your mother extinguishes the lamp to save the precious oil, plunging the interior into darkness. In the blackness of a frontier night, without even the ambient light pollution of modern times, sleep comes quickly to bodies that are exhausted by the day's labor. Your last thought before drifting off is of your father. He's now likely camping somewhere on his journey to the mines, exposed to the same storm and countless other hazards of frontier travel. His fate, like so much in this harsh world, lies beyond your knowledge or control. It's a fundamental uncertainty that the frontier people lived with every single day. A week passes in your father's absence, and each day blends into the next in a rhythm of endless chores and small emergencies. The fence breaks again. A fox takes one of the chickens. The rain delays the planting of the replacement seedlings in the storm-damaged garden. Through it all, you and your mother adapt and endure, falling into the patterns of frontier resilience that define this era. On the 8th day, as you're repairing the chicken coop, you hear the approach of horses, multiple riders by the sound of it. Your mother emerges from the soddy, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression is a mixture of curiosity and weariness. Visitors are rare, and unexpected visitors are even rarer. 3 riders appear over the low rise to the east, 2 men and a woman. As they draw closer, your mother relaxes slightly. "It's just the Johnsons," she says, and it looks like Reverend Parker is with them. The visitors dismount in the yard, exchanging greetings with your mother. The older man, Reverend Parker, is dressed in a black coat that's seen better days, but it still marks him as someone of relative status. The Johnson couple are clearly neighbors, from their weathered appearance and their practical clothing. "The circuit brought me round again, Mrs. Mason," the Reverend explains, removing his hat respectfully. "We thought we'd check on you, what with your husband gone to the mines." This, you realize, is Frontier Social Services in action. The community checking on its potentially vulnerable members during a hardship, without any government assistance programs or formal support structures. Neighbors and traveling preachers filled the gap, offering practical help and maintaining the social bonds. Your mother invites them inside, an indication of both frontier hospitality and the visitor's status. The soddy feels crowded with 5 people inside, but no one comments on the humble surroundings. On the frontier, any pretension about living conditions was pointless when everyone was facing similar challenges. Mrs. Johnson has brought a gift, a jar of preserved peaches, golden and gleaming in their glass container. The simple present represents a significant generosity in a world where such luxuries were rare and hard-won. "I thought you might enjoy these," she says, placing the jar on the rough table. "They're from last year's harvest, but they kept well." Your mother receives the gift with appropriate appreciation, and she immediately offers coffee in return, which has been stretched with roasted grain to make the precious beans last longer. But it's still the expected hospitality for visitors. As the coffee brews on the cook stove, the conversation turns to community news and events. This social exchange, you realize, is not just a pleasantry, but a crucial information network in a world without telephones, newspapers, or the internet. The Hendersons lost their youngest to croup, Mrs. Johnson reports soberly. They buried him last Tuesday. Lord, rest his soul, your mother responds, making the sign of the cross. That's the second child they've lost this year. The casualness with which child mortality is discussed, sad, but not shocking, highlights another frontier reality. In an era when approximately 1 in 4 children died before the age of 5, grief was a common experience. It was acknowledged, but it was not allowed to interrupt the business of survival. Miller's planning a social when his barn's finished. Mr. Johnson offers, moving to lighter topics. It's 2 weeks from Saturday, weather permitting. There'll be dancing and a potluck. This news brings a smile to your mother's face. It's a rare expression of anticipation. It's been a while since we've had a proper gathering. Will there be music? Jensen's boy is bringing his fiddle, and I hear tell that the new family from Ohio has a guitar player among them. The planned social gathering, a barn dance and a community meal, represents one of the few recreational opportunities in frontier life. These events served multiple purposes. They provided entertainment, they strengthened the community bonds, they offered courting opportunities for the young people, and they created a temporary respite from the isolation and the hardship of their daily existence. Reverend Parker sips his coffee and turns the conversation to more spiritual matters. I'll be holding a service at the schoolhouse a week from Sunday. I hope to see you there, Mrs. Mason. The Lord's word brings comfort in trying times. Religion was a central organizing force in the frontier communities, providing not just spiritual guidance, but also social structure and a shared identity. The traveling preacher or circuit rider might visit each settlement only once a month, or even less frequently, which made the church services special occasions that combined worship, socializing, and community business. We'll be there, Reverend, your mother promises. It's been too long since we've heard a proper sermon. As the conversation continues, you notice how much information is exchanged in these seemingly casual interactions. The weather patterns that were observed by families living 10 miles away, a new merchant who is setting up shop in the nearest town, a family who is heading back east after failing to make their homestead profitable, potential jobs for the young men at the sawmill that was just established near the railroad. Each piece of news could affect their survival or their opportunity in the interconnected frontier economy. After the coffee is finished, the men step outside to examine your repair work on the chicken coop and the fence, offering suggestions and commenting on your efforts. This, too, is a part of the frontier social systems, the sharing of practical knowledge and skills between the neighbors, which ensured that the collective wisdom of the community benefited all of its members. Meanwhile, Mrs. Johnson and your mother engage in their own form of knowledge exchange, discussing their garden's progress, their food preservation techniques, and their home remedies for common ailments. Their conversation is dense with practical information, from the best time to harvest specific herbs to the methods for keeping the flower free from weevils. When the visitors prepare to leave an hour later, there's a final exchange of community obligations. We'll keep an eye out for any word from the mines, Mr. Johnson promises. Any news of your husband, we'll get it to you straight away. And if you need a hand with anything heavy, you just send word, Mrs. Johnson adds. Our boys can ride over. These offers aren't just politeness, but a form of frontier insurance, a system of mutual aid that helped the families to survive a crisis or a labor shortage. Today's assistance, which was freely given, would be reciprocated when the Johnsons faced their own challenges, creating a network of support without any formal structure. After the visitors depart, your mother seems energized by the social contact, and she moves more briskly through her afternoon tasks. "It's good to have some news," she comments as you help her to prepare supper. "It gets lonely out here with just ourselves for company." The isolation of frontier life was perhaps its most psychologically challenging aspect. The homesteads were often miles apart, with natural barriers of weather and terrain that frequently made even these short distances impossible to cross. Weeks or even months might pass without seeing anyone other than your immediate family, which created a social deprivation that modern people would find almost unbearable. "What's a social like?" you ask, curious about the event that was mentioned by the Johnsons. Your mother smiles slightly at the memory. A proper one has music and dancing, with food laid out for everyone to share. The young folks are courting under their parents' watchful eyes. The children are playing games. The men are talking about crops and politics, and the women are catching up on all the family matters. Her description reveals the multi-layered functions of the frontier social gatherings, which simultaneously served as entertainment, a matrimonial market, a political forum, a news exchange, a culinary exhibition, and a community bonding exercise. Everyone dresses up in their Sunday best. She continues, stirring the pot of beans that will be your evening meal. Not that it's much, mind you, but it's clean and mended at least. And for one evening, we get to pretend that we're somewhere fine, instead of just scratching out a life from this stubborn soil. This temporary escape from their harsh reality, this brief opportunity to experience joy and connection, was perhaps the most valuable aspect of frontier social life. The dance or the gathering created a space where laughter was permitted, where physical touch, even if it was just a formal dance hold, connected the isolated individuals, and where the music offered an emotional expression that was beyond the pragmatic communication of their daily lives. The next morning brings another visitor, who is unexpected and less welcome. A man on horseback arrives shortly after dawn. His city clothes and his official manner immediately set him apart from the neighbors. He carries a leather satchel, and he wears a badge that identifies him as a representative of the county government. "Tax assessor," your mother mutters, watching from the doorway as he dismounts. "What more do they want from us?" The interaction that follows reveals another dimension of the frontier social systems, the sometimes adversarial relationship between the settlers and the government authorities. The tax assessor has come to verify the property improvements that were claimed on your family's homestead, to ensure that they meet the requirements for continued ownership under the Homestead Act. His inspection is thorough and uncomfortable. He's measuring the cultivated acreage, examining the structures, and making notes in an official ledger. Your mother follows him silently, her expression carefully neutral despite the intrusion. You tag along, learning yet another frontier lesson, that even in this supposedly Wild West, bureaucracy and government oversight were very real forces. The cultivation looks a bit short of the required percentage, the assessor comments, making another note. And the dwelling is. He glances at the soddy with a barely concealed disdain, somewhat primitive. My husband's working at the mines to earn money for improvements. Your mother replies, her voice steady despite the implied criticism. We meet all the legal requirements. The assessor makes a non-committal sound and continues with his examination. This tense dance between the settlers and the officials was common on the frontier, where the families often operated at the very edge of legal compliance due to the harsh realities of establishing a homestead with very limited resources. After the assessor finally leaves, with a warning about needing to see significant improvements by his next visit, your mother allows herself a rare moment of visible anger. Sitting in his fine office in town, he's never broken ground himself, telling us that our place isn't good enough. She fumes, aggressively kneading the dough for the day's bread. Let him try living in a soddy through the winter. Then he can talk to me about improvements. This resentment toward the distant authority figures was a defining characteristic of the frontier social attitudes. The settlers who faced daily physical hardship and a constant pressure for survival had little patience for the bureaucratic demands that seemed to be disconnected from their lived reality. The afternoon brings a more pleasant social interaction when a wagon appears on the horizon. The peddler is returning on his regular route. Unlike the tax assessor, the peddler is welcomed warmly, not just for his goods, but for the news and the social connection he brings from the wider world. I heard about your man heading to the mines, he comments as he sets up his mobile display in the yard. It's hard work, but it's good money if he's lucky. The peddler's wagon contains the usual assortment of necessities and small luxuries: fabric, thread, tools, medicines, spices, and candies. But it's his information that proves to be the most valuable. He's recently come from the direction of the mines, and he carries news of the conditions there. The company's hearing strong, and they're paying cash as promised, he reports as your mother examines a bolt of fabric. But the living conditions are rough. The men are packed 12 to a cabin, and they're paying dear for poor food. This intelligence about your father's likely situation is worth more than any of the goods the peddler carries. The information allows your mother to better estimate when to expect a communication or his return, and what funds might eventually reach the homestead. The social function of the peddler extended far beyond just commerce. In a world without any telecommunications, these traveling merchants created connections between the isolated communities, carrying news, personal messages, and cultural trends across the vast distances. Any mail for the Masons? Your mother asks hopefully, though it's too soon for any word from your father. The question reveals another aspect of frontier isolation: the hunger for communication from absent loved ones. Nothing yet, the peddler replies sympathetically. But I'll check at the post office the next time I'm through town. I should be back this way in about 3 weeks or so. After some deliberation and a careful counting of the few coins that were set aside for emergencies, your mother purchases some needles, a small quantity of sugar, and, somewhat surprisingly, a newspaper that was printed in the territorial capital. Though it's several weeks old, the paper represents a rare connection to the wider world and its politics. That evening, by the light of the lamp, your mother reads selected articles aloud, news of congressional debates, railroad expansions, Indian treaties, and territorial disputes. The information might seem abstract, given your immediate survival concerns, but the frontier settlers understood that distant political decisions could directly impact their lives through land policies, military deployments, or economic regulations. It says here they're considering closing the land office in Jefferson County, she notes with concern. That would mean a 100-mile journey to file our paperwork, instead of 40. This practical interest in seemingly distant affairs reveals the sophisticated political awareness that many frontier people maintained, despite their isolation. Their vulnerability to policy changes made them avid consumers of political news when it was available, and they had strong opinions on the issues that were affecting their precarious existence. The next day brings yet another dimension of frontier social life, when a group of Native Americans appears at the edge of your property. Your mother spots them first as she's hanging the laundry out to dry. Pawnee, she identifies them, her voice low but not particularly alarmed. They're probably looking to trade. The small group, 3 men and 2 women, approaches cautiously, stopping at a respectful distance from the sadi. One of the men steps forward, holding up an item that appears to be a tanned animal hide. Get the cornmeal, your mother instructs you, and some of those metal buttons from the sewing box. The interaction that follows defies the simplistic cowboys versus Indians narrative of the Hollywood westerns. The trade is conducted with minimal verbal communication, but with mutual respect. Each side examines the offered goods carefully before they agree to the exchange. The buckskin the Pawnee are offering is soft and beautifully tanned, far superior to anything your family could produce. In return, your mother provides them with cornmeal, the buttons, and a small knife that she retrieves from a hidden location after careful consideration. There's a weariness on both sides, but also a practiced courtesy. Neither party attempts to cheat the other, understanding that fair trading relationships were valuable in the isolated frontier environment, where both the settlers and the indigenous people faced the common challenges of survival. After the trade is concluded, the leader of the Pawnee group gestures toward the creek that runs through your property, making a drinking motion and then a negative gesture. He's warning us about the water, your mother interprets, nodding her understanding to the man. I guess that confirms what we suspected about the contamination upstream. This exchange of potentially life-saving information exemplifies the complex relationship between the settlers and the Native Americans on the frontier. While conflicts certainly did occur, pragmatic cooperation was also common, with both groups recognizing the practical value of peaceful coexistence and the sharing of knowledge. After the Pawnee depart, your mother carefully wraps the buckskin and stores it inside the sadi. That was a good trade, she comments. This will make some fine moccasins for the winter, much warmer than those store-bought boots that never seem to fit right. The acquisition represents more than just its practical value. It's a form of frontier wealth accumulation, storing resources against their future needs. In a world without banks or a reliable currency, physical goods with utility served as both their savings and their insurance. As evening approaches, another social dimension of frontier life emerges when your mother suggests a visit to check on Martha, the healer who had helped out at the barn raising. "I've been thinking about that coughing girl," she explains as you saddle the family's remaining horse, "and Martha might have some letters or news from town." The journey to Martha's homestead takes nearly an hour, following faint trails across the prairie. The homestead itself is modest, but it's better established than yours, with a small wooden house instead of a soddy, a well-tended garden, and several outbuildings, including what appears to be a dedicated medical space. Martha welcomes you with the automatic hospitality of the frontier culture, immediately offering you food and asking after your father. The social call quickly reveals its multiple purposes: checking on a neighbor, seeking medical advice, exchanging news, and strengthening the community bonds. As the women talk, you observe Martha's home and are struck by the evidence of her unique social position. Unlike most frontier women who were primarily defined by their roles as wives and mothers, Martha appears to be unmarried, but she's respected for her specialized knowledge. Her cabin contains books, a rarity on the frontier, and shelves of labeled containers that are holding herbs, powders, and various medical preparations. "How's the Miller girl?" your mother asks after the preliminary pleasantries. Martha's expression grows somber. "She's failing, I'm afraid." The consumption is deep in her lungs now. Her family's talking about sending her to Colorado. The mountain air sometimes helps. This potential journey for treatment represents another aspect of frontier healthcare, the desperate measures that families would take when their local options were exhausted. The cost of sending a sick family member hundreds of miles away to a different climate was enormous, both financially and emotionally. Yet the alternative was watching them slowly die without any kind of intervention. As darkness approaches, your mother prepares to leave, having accomplished her multiple social aims. She's confirmed Martha's assessment of the Miller girl's condition. She shared the information about the Pawnee traders and their warning about the creek water, and she subtly ensured that Martha knows that your household might need some extra attention during your father's absence. The ride home through the deepening twilight becomes its own lesson in frontier social awareness. Your mother points out the distant lights of other homesteads that are scattered across the prairie. Each one represents a family that's engaged in the same struggle for survival. The Johnson place is there, she indicates, a faint glow to the northwest, and that's the Petersons beyond it. You can just make out the Williamsons' place on that far rise. This mental mapping of their neighbors, knowing exactly who lived where, even miles distant, was crucial to the frontier's social functioning. In an emergency, knowing which direction to send for help could mean the difference between survival and disaster. Back at your soddy, preparing for sleep after the long day, your mother reflects on the various social interactions you've experienced. "Community is what keeps you alive out here," she observes, banking the cookstove fire for the night. "You can't make it alone. No matter what those dime novels back east might say about the lone heroes of the frontier." This fundamental truth, that survival depended on complex social networks rather than individual prowess, contradicts the mythic individualism that's often associated with the Wild West. The reality was a sophisticated system of mutual support, information exchange, and shared resources that helped the settlers to weather the crises that no single family could have overcome on their own. The next day brings another dimension of frontier social life with the arrival of a young boy on a winded horse. He can't be more than 12, but he's clearly ridden hard with an important message. Ma says to come quick. He pants, hardly dismounting before he delivers his news. The baby's coming early and she's having a hard time. Your mother moves with a practiced efficiency, gathering clean cloths, her small collection of medical supplies, and a jar of something that's been preserved. Within minutes, she's saddled the horse and is prepared to leave. It's the Thompsons' fourth, she explains as she mounts. Her previous births were difficult. Martha's already there, but she's asked for some extra hands. She fixes you with a serious look. You mind the place. I might be gone overnight if there's any trouble. This emergency midwifery assistance, with women dropping everything to help their neighbors through childbirth, was another crucial element of the frontier social systems. Without any hospitals or professional medical care, childbirth was managed by the community's women, who shared the dangerous but essential work of bringing new life into the world. Left alone at the homestead, you experience for the first time the profound isolation that was the daily reality for many of the frontier residents. The soddy feels eerily quiet without your mother's presence, and each creak or rustle from outside raises a momentary alarm. This was the psychological burden of frontier life, the constant awareness of your vulnerability and the knowledge that help might be hours or even days away in an emergency. You move through the necessary chores with extra care, knowing that an injury while you're alone could be disastrous. You're feeding the animals, checking the traps, and hauling water from the rain barrel, the creek still being suspect. Each task takes on a new significance when you're the only person who is responsible for survival. As dusk approaches, with no sign of your mother's return, you secure the sadi just as she taught you. You bar the door, you keep the rifle loaded but safe, and you bank the fire to last through the night. The simple wooden structure suddenly seems terribly fragile against the vastness of the prairie night and whatever threats it might contain. Sleep comes fitfully, interrupted by unfamiliar sounds and the heavy awareness of being truly alone in this harsh environment. This, too, was a part of the frontier experience, the psychological resilience that was required to endure the isolation and the uncertainty without any modern distractions or communications. Morning brings relief with your mother's return. Her exhausted face tells its own story before she even speaks. It's a baby girl, she reports, dismounting stiffly from the horse. It was a breech birth, and it was touch and go for a while, but both the mother and the child pulled through. The matter-of-fact delivery of this news belies the drama of what must have been a dangerous medical emergency. Breech births frequently resulted in the death of the mother, the child, or both, in an era before surgical interventions or fetal monitoring. Martha turned the baby. Your mother continues, accepting the cup of coffee you've prepared. I've never seen hands so skilled. It was like she could feel exactly what needed to be done without even seeing. This admiration for a specialized skill, this recognition of knowledge that meant the difference between life and death, was another aspect of the frontier social dynamics. Status came not just from wealth or property, but from useful abilities that contributed to the community's survival. After resting briefly, your mother returns to her normal chores. The childbirth emergency is already categorized as just another aspect of her frontier social obligation. This matter-of-fact approach to critical events, this lack of dramatization or extended processing, was what characterized the frontier mentality of handling whatever came and just moving forward. The days pass in the established rhythm of work and occasional social contact. A neighboring farmer stops by to offer his excess seed potatoes. The peddler passes through again, this time carrying a letter from your father. It's brief but reassuring, reporting his safe arrival at the mines and promising to send some money when he's able. Martha visits to share some medicinal plants she's gathered, taking the time to teach you both how to prepare and use them. Each of these interactions reinforces the complex social web that made frontier survival possible. No homestead was truly self-sufficient. They all depended on the exchange of goods, labor, knowledge, and support that defined the frontier community, despite the physical distances that separated the households. 2 weeks after your father's departure, the promised social gathering at the Miller farm finally arrives. Your mother approaches the event with an unusual attention to her appearance, brushing her hair with special care, and putting on a clean dress that was kept specifically for such occasions. "I'm not much for finery," she acknowledges, noticing your observation of these preparations. "But a social is one time to remember that we're more than just work animals." The Miller's completed barn has been transformed for the event, with lanterns hanging from the rafters, hay bales arranged as seating, and a cleared area for dancing. A table holds the contributions from the attending families: pies, cakes, preserves, and roasted meats that represent the best each household could offer. The gathering includes nearly every family from within a 20-mile radius, creating a crowd that would seem modest by modern standards. But it represents an extraordinary concentration of humanity in the sparsely populated frontier. The children run and play in groups. The teenagers eye each other with a shy interest from opposite sides of the barn, and the adults catch up on months of news and developments. You notice how the social patterns shift in this rare gathering. The men, who work in isolation most of the time, form animated discussion groups, sharing their farming techniques, their weather predictions, and their political opinions. The women, who normally manage their households alone, move between the social circles, exchanging recipes, medical advice, and family updates. The young people engage in carefully supervised courtship rituals that will potentially form the next generation of frontier families. The music begins: a fiddle, a guitar, and someone playing the spoons, creating a surprisingly rich sound that fills the barn. Couples form for the dancing, following patterns that seem to be universally known, despite the diverse origins of the settlers. Your mother is asked to dance by a widowed neighbor, and she accepts with a smile that momentarily transforms her usually serious face. This celebration, this temporary escape from the grinding work of survival, reveals the human need for joy and connection that persisted even in the harshest frontier conditions. The social wasn't a frivolous luxury, but a necessary psychological release that helped people to continue facing the challenges of settlement. Food is shared, stories are told, and children fall asleep on the hay bales as the evening progresses. And for a few hours, the isolation and the hardship of frontier life recede into the background. This, too, was the real Wild West, not just the struggle and the danger that are emphasized in the popular narratives, but the community bonds and the simple pleasures that made the struggle worthwhile. As you observe from the sidelines, still feeling somewhat outside of this tight-knit community, despite your integration into your frontier family, you notice how the information flows through the gathering. News of births, deaths, migrations, crop conditions, and distant events is passed from person to person, creating a collective awareness that will shape their decisions and their actions in the coming months. The social also serves practical purposes beyond just entertainment. A young man announces that he's heading to the territorial capital, and he offers to carry letters or conduct business for his neighbors. The families arrange future work exchanges, helping with the harvests or the barn repairs in rotation to maximize their limited labor. A collection is taken up for a family who lost their cow to an illness, which demonstrates the frontier version of disaster assistance. As the evening winds down and the families begin their journey home through the darkness, there's a tangible reluctance to disperse, to return to the isolation that defines their normal frontier existence. The goodbyes are extended, final pieces of news are exchanged, and promises are made to visit when it's possible, though they all know that the demands of their work and the weather conditions will limit such opportunities. The ride home is quiet, both you and your mother lost in your own thoughts as the horse navigates the familiar trails by the light of the moon. The contrast between the lively social gathering and the silent, empty prairie creates a poignancy that needs no verbal acknowledgement. "It's good to see folks," your mother finally says as the soddy comes into view. It reminds you why we keep struggling with this hard land. This simple statement captures the essence of the frontier social systems. The community connections that provided not just practical support, but also the psychological motivation to continue, despite the hardship. People endured the isolation, the danger, and the back-breaking labor not just for their individual survival, but for the chance to build something meaningful together, to create a community in the wilderness. Back in the soddy, preparing for sleep after the unusual excitement of the evening, you realize how much your understanding of the Wild West has evolved. The romanticized image of lone heroes and individual triumph has given way to a more complex reality of interdependent communities that are working together against their common challenges. The true story of the frontier wasn't primarily about gunfights and gold rushes, but about ordinary people who were creating social structures that made their survival possible in extraordinary circumstances. Their heroism wasn't in dramatic confrontations, but in the daily choice to persist, to help their neighbors, and to maintain their civilization in conditions that constantly threatened to overwhelm it. As you drift towards sleep, the music from the social still echoing in your mind, you recognize that this, too, is a part of the authentic Wild West experience. The moments of joy and connection that sustained people through the darker times, and the community bonds that were as essential to their survival as water and food. Outside, the coyotes call in the distance, a reminder that the wilderness still surrounds this fragile pocket of human settlement. Inside, the Sadi feels a bit less primitive after experiencing the shared humanity of the social gathering. Both of these realities were what defined the frontier experience: the constant struggle against nature's challenges, and the community connections that made that struggle endurable. Sleep comes easily after the unusual activities of the day. Your body is relaxing into the now familiar straw mattress that no longer seems quite so alien. The frontier social world, with all its complexity, its necessity, and its occasional moments of joy, has revealed itself as perhaps the most sophisticated adaptation that the settlers developed in their quest to tame the Wild West. 3 weeks have passed since your father departed for the mines. The rhythm of frontier life has become almost familiar. The daily chores are no longer mysterious. The endless work is no longer shocking. The primitive conditions are no longer quite so jarring. You've adapted to this harsh reality with a surprising speed. Your body is growing stronger and your skills are more assured with each passing day. But frontier life has one more lesson to teach you, perhaps the most important one. No matter how well you plan, how hard you work, or how carefully you prepare, danger remains a constant companion on the frontier. And sometimes it arrives without any warning. The day begins like any other: the early rising, the animal feeding, the water hauling. The weather is clear and mild, a perfect late spring day with birds singing and wildflowers dotting the prairie. Your mother hums softly as she works in the garden, the sound carrying through the still morning air. Then she stops suddenly, her head tilted, listening intently. "Do you hear that?" she asks, her body tensing. At first, you hear nothing unusual, just the normal sounds of the prairie morning. Then it reaches you, a distant rumbling like far-off thunder, but it's continuous and it's growing louder. Your mother's face pales. "Fire," she says, the single word carrying an unmistakable dread. She points to the horizon where a smudge of darkness has appeared against the blue sky. At this distance, it might seem insignificant, but her reaction tells you that it's anything but. It's a prairie fire, she explains, already moving with an urgent purpose toward the Sadi. The wind's bringing it this way. We don't have much time. Prairie fires were among the most feared dangers on the frontier. They were fast-moving, all-consuming, and nearly impossible to fight once they were fully established. The sea of grass that stretched for miles in all directions became a deadly fuel when it was ignited, creating infernos that could travel faster than a horse could run. Your mother bursts into action with a practiced efficiency, grabbing a shovel and heading to the edge of your plowed field. "Start digging. We need to widen the fire break." The next hour is a blur of desperate labor. You dig frantically, expanding the bare earth barrier between your cultivated land and the surrounding prairie. Your mother works just as hard, her face streaked with sweat and dirt, her hands blistering on the shovel handle. The smoke grows thicker and the rumbling gets louder. Occasionally, you glance up to see the dark cloud expanding across the horizon, advancing with a terrifying speed. The smell reaches you now: burning grass and earth, carried on a wind that's beginning to gust ominously. "Get the animals," your mother orders as you finish widening the fire break as much as you possibly can in the limited time. "Get the cow and the Sadi, and have the horse ready to ride if we need to flee. The chickens, she hesitates, making some hard calculations about what can realistically be saved. The chickens, we'll have to let them take their chances in the coop. This triage, this brutal assessment of what can be saved and what must be sacrificed, was a common feature of frontier emergencies. With limited resources and time, difficult choices had to be made instantly, with their potential survival hanging in the balance. You lead the cow into the soddy, the animal sensing the danger and resisting at first, before allowing itself to be guided inside. The horse is saddled and tied near the door, ready for a quick departure if the firebrake fails to hold. Your mother, meanwhile, has been soaking blankets and burlap sacks in the precious water from the rain barrel. For beating out the sparks, she explains, handing you a dripping cloth. Stay vigilant. One ember can set everything ablaze. The fire is visible now. A line of flames at the distant edge of the prairie, advancing like an army toward your vulnerable homestead. The roar has grown to a constant thunder, punctuated by crackles and pops as the fire devours everything in its path. Animals are fleeing before it. Rabbits, ground squirrels, and even a few deer are racing past your property without sparing a glance for the humans they would normally avoid. The birds are circling overhead, displaced from their nests and perches by the advancing inferno. If it jumps the firebrake, your mother shouts over the increasing roar. We take the horse and we head for the creek. It's our only chance. The unspoken reality hangs between you. That would mean abandoning everything else to the flames. The soddy might survive with its earthen construction, but all the other structures, the crops, and the animals would be lost. Months or even years of work would be destroyed in a matter of minutes. As the fire draws closer, you can feel its heat on your face. Despite the distance that's still separating you, the sky has darkened with smoke, creating an eerie twilight in what should be the mid-morning. Ash begins to fall like gray snow, coating everything with a powdery film. Here it comes, your mother says grimly, gripping her wet sack tighter. Stay ready. The fire hits the edge of your firebrake with a frightening intensity. The flames leaping higher than you could have ever imagined possible. The heat becomes nearly unbearable, forcing you to step back, despite the need to remain vigilant for any crossing sparks. For what feels like endless minutes, you watch as the fire burns along the boundary of your land, seeking any opportunity to cross. Occasionally, a burning ember flies across on the wind, and you or your mother rush to beat it out before it can ignite the dry grass on your side of the break. It's exhausting, terrifying work. You're maintaining constant vigilance while you're enduring the intense heat and the smoke that burns your lungs, and the ever-present knowledge that just one missed ember could mean disaster. This was frontier danger in its purest form, elemental, unpredictable, and utterly indifferent to human survival. Eventually, mercifully, the main fire front passes, continuing its destructive path to the east of your property. The immediate danger recedes, though you both continue to watch for hours as the smaller fires burn themselves out and new embers occasionally drift onto your land. By late afternoon, the world around you has been transformed. Where the lush prairie grass once stretched to the horizon, there is now only blackened earth, still smoking in places, with the occasional charred remnant of a small animal that was caught in the flames. The air remains thick with smoke and ash, which makes breathing difficult and coats your skin with a gritty residue. We were lucky, your mother says simply, surveying the devastation. The fire could have changed direction. The fire break could have failed. The wind could have carried more embers. This matter-of-fact acknowledgement of how close they came to disaster, this lack of emotional drama despite the life-threatening emergency, was what typified the frontier responses to danger. There was no time for an extended processing of their fear or their relief. Survival required an immediate focus on what needed to be done next. "We need to check the creek," she continues practically. "The fire might have driven some predators our way, and the garden will need some extra water after all that heat and smoke." Life continues with barely a pause to acknowledge their narrow escape. This, too, was the frontier way. They absorbed these potentially traumatic experiences and just pushed forward because stopping wasn't an option. The work of survival remained, regardless of what dangers they had just faced. The next morning brings a new threat. It's different, but it's equally dangerous. You wake to find your mother already up, staring out the small window with an obvious concern. "There are riders," she says tersely when she notices you're awake. "I don't recognize them." In the frontier environment, unknown visitors represented a potential danger. Without any law enforcement readily available, the homesteaders were largely responsible for their own protection, which made caution around strangers a survival necessity rather than just paranoia. "Get the rifle ready," she instructs, her voice calm despite the tension that was evident in her posture. "But you keep it out of sight unless it's needed." The weapon is brought out from its hiding place and loaded efficiently. Your mother positions herself in the doorway of the sadi, greeting the approaching riders with a raised hand, but she maintains her place at the threshold, neither overtly hostile nor naively welcoming. Morning calls the lead rider, a hard-faced man with a dust-covered coat. "I saw you survive the fire." "God's mercy," your mother responds neutrally. "What brings you our way?" "We're looking for strays," the man explains, gesturing to the open range. "The fire scattered our herd. We thought some might have come in this direction." The explanation is plausible. The cattle would indeed flee from a prairie fire, and they could potentially become lost in the process. But something in the man's manner keeps your mother cautious. Her hand never strays far from where the rifle is resting just inside the door. "We haven't seen any," she responds, "but you're welcome to check our north pasture if you think they might be there." This measured hospitality, offering limited access while maintaining clear boundaries, was another frontier skill. In a world where refusing aid to legitimate travelers could violate important social codes, but where vulnerability could be exploited by those with ill intent, such careful navigation was essential. The riders confer briefly, and then they decline her offer. "We'll keep looking elsewhere," the leader decides, his eyes scanning your modest homestead with an intensity that seems unnecessary for someone who is merely seeking lost cattle. As they ride away, your mother remains in the doorway until they're well beyond your property line. Only then does she relax slightly, though the rifle stays within her reach. "They weren't looking for cattle," she says with certainty. "They were more likely checking to see which places were left vulnerable after the fire." This frontier danger, the human predators who saw disaster as an opportunity, was less dramatic than the natural threats, but it was often more malevolent. Without any established law enforcement, The isolated homesteads could become targets for those who were seeking to profit from the misfortune of others. What would we have done if they'd tried something? You ask. The reality of your vulnerability is suddenly stark. Your mother glances at the rifle. Whatever was necessary, she answers simply. Out here, sometimes it's just you standing between your family and those who would take what's yours. This readiness to defend what was essential for their survival, this acceptance that conflict might sometimes be unavoidable, was another aspect of the frontier reality that contradicts the romanticized notions of either lawless violence or peaceful settlement. Most of the homesteaders sought to avoid trouble, but they were prepared to face it when it was necessary. The day continues with a heightened vigilance, with both of you keeping watch while you're completing the necessary chores. By evening, no further strangers have appeared, and the tension gradually eases, though the rifle remains more accessible than it was before. Your pa should have been gone a month tomorrow, your mother comments as you share a simple supper of beans and cornbread. If all's gone well, we might get some word from him soon. The uncertainty that surrounded your father's fate, the complete lack of information about his safety or his progress, was yet another burden of frontier life. Without any regular communication, the families lived with a constant uncertainty about their absent members, never knowing if the silence meant merely distance or something more tragic. That night, a new danger arrives. It's one that demonstrates the frontier's capacity to threaten from unexpected directions. You wake to the sound of your mother coughing violently, her breathing labored and raspy in the darkness. "It's just the smoke," she manages to say between her coughs. "It got into my lungs yesterday." By morning, her condition has worsened. A fever now accompanies the cough, and her normally strong, capable body seems diminished, huddled under a blanket despite the mild temperature. This, too, was a frontier reality. How quickly an illness could transform strength into weakness, and how vulnerable even the most resilient people became when their health failed. "You need to get Martha," she instructs, her voice barely above a whisper. "Take the horse. And you bring her back if she can come. The responsibility falls entirely on you. You'll be riding alone across the partially burned prairie to seek help, leaving your mother vulnerable in the soddy, and you'll be navigating without any guidance to Martha's homestead." This sudden role reversal, from a dependent to a provider, was another common frontier experience, where the circumstances often forced people into responsibilities that were beyond their preparation or their preference. The ride to Martha's seems longer than it did before. Each landmark is less certain without your mother's guidance. When you finally arrive, the frontier healer takes one look at your worried face and begins gathering her supplies without needing an explanation. "Your ma's sick," she confirms, packing some herbs and tinctures into a bag. You explain the symptoms to her, the coughing, the fever, the weakness, and Martha nods grimly. "Smoke sickness." She diagnoses. "I've seen it before after the big fires. It can turn to pneumonia if it's not treated." The return journey feels both urgent and painfully slow. Your anxiety is growing with each passing minute. This, too, was the frontier experience. The terrible knowledge that time could mean the difference between recovery and disaster, coupled with the inability to move any faster than an animal's power would allow. Martha takes charge immediately upon your arrival. Her experienced hands are examining your mother with a gentle efficiency. She applies various treatments, herbal teas, chest poultices, and steam inhalations, using techniques that have been refined through generations of frontier medicine. She needs watching, Martha tells you after the initial treatments. Day and night for a while. I'll stay today, but you'll need to manage after that. This transfer of medical knowledge, this crash course in necessary care, was another aspect of frontier healthcare. With professional help being limited or absent, ordinary people became caregivers by necessity, learning the essential skills through direct instruction during a crisis. For the next several days, your role transforms entirely. You are now the provider, the protector, and the nurse. You're handling all of the homestead chores, while also caring for your mother through her feverish nights and her painful coughing spells. The experience ages you somehow, the responsibility weighing heavier than the physical labor ever could. Slowly, incrementally, your mother begins to improve. The fever breaks and the coughing grows less severe. Her strength gradually returns. But the illness has taken a toll, leaving her thinner and more fragile than she was before, and she's temporarily unable to manage the physical demands of frontier life. You've done well, she tells you one evening, watching as you complete the chores that would have been hers just a few days ago. I couldn't have managed without you. This acknowledgement, this recognition of your essential contribution to their survival, carries a significance that's beyond simple gratitude. It represents your integration into the frontier system, your transformation from an observer to a participant in the complex dance of mutual dependence that define the settlement life. As your mother continues to recover, another potential danger appears on the horizon. Quite literally, dark clouds are building in the west, towering and ominous against the setting sun. The air grows strangely still, with an oppressive quality that makes your breathing feel labored. There's a storm coming, your mother observes from where she's sitting near the door. She's still too weak for full activity, but she's alert to the environmental threats. It's a bad one from the look of those clouds. The weather represented one of the frontier's most unpredictable dangers, capable of destroying their crops, damaging their structures, and injuring or killing people and livestock, all without any warning or recourse. Without modern forecasting, the settlers had to rely on their observation and their experience to anticipate the threats, but they often had little time to prepare. Get everything secured, she instructs. The animals need to be in the barn, the water buckets need to be filled, and anything that can blow away needs to be tied down or brought inside. You work quickly as the darkness falls. The approaching storm adds an urgency to your movements. The air has taken on a greenish tinge that your mother watches with a visible concern from the doorway. There could be a twister in those clouds, she warns. If you hear a sound like a train or you see a funnel, you get to the root cellar immediately. Don't wait for me. I'll make my own way if I need to. This calculation, this prioritization of your safety over hers, reveals another aspect of the frontier values. The survival of the young, those who could carry on if others fell, often took precedence over individual safety in their emergency planning. The storm hits with a surprising suddenness. One moment, there's a relative calm, and the next, there's a fury of wind and rain that's lashing the Saudi with an incredible force. The structure shudders under the assault, dirt crumbling from the walls and the roof with each powerful gust. The lightning illuminates the interior in brief, blinding flashes, followed by thunder that's so powerful it seems to shake the very ground. The rain finds every weakness in the sod roof, creating streams that quickly turn portions of the dirt floor to mud. "Get the bedding up," your mother directs, pointing to where the water is beginning to pool near the sleeping areas. "And put the pan there to catch that worst leak." The night becomes an exercise in constant adaptation. You're moving containers to catch new leaks, wiping away the mud that threatens to infiltrate their food stores, and reinforcing the door when the wind threatens to tear it from its hinges. This dynamic response to a crisis, this continuous adjustment to the changing threats, was what characterized the frontier resilience at its most fundamental level. Hours pass with no diminishment in the storm's intensity. The Sadi, which had seemed so solid in fair weather, reveals its vulnerability to nature's fury. Yet it stands, its earthen mass absorbing the punishment that would have destroyed flimsier structures. "This is why we build with sod first," your mother explains during a brief lull in the thunderclaps. "A wood house would look prettier, but it might not survive a night like this." The practical wisdom of frontier construction, which prioritized function over appearance and survival over comfort, demonstrates again how every aspect of the settler's life was shaped by the environmental realities rather than their aesthetic preferences. Eventually, mercifully, the storm begins to weaken. The wind dies down from a howling fury to occasional gusts. The rain goes from horizontal sheets to gentle drops. By dawn, it has passed entirely, leaving a transformed landscape in its wake. The damage assessment begins at first light. The Sadi has survived largely intact, though it has new leaks to repair and a partial collapse of one of the wall sections that will require immediate attention. The chicken coop has lost its roof entirely, though miraculously, most of the birds remain huddled in the corners or under what shelter remains. The garden has been flattened. The tender plants have been beaten into the mud by the rain and the hail. The crops in the field show similar damage, though your mother offers some hope that some of them might recover if the weather improves in the coming weeks. "It could have been worse," is her measured assessment as you complete the survey. "There was no tornado, the barn is still standing, and the animals are alive." This capacity to find silver linings in a disaster, to measure their loss against what remains rather than what might have been in better circumstances, was another psychological adaptation to the frontier hardship. Focusing on their continued survival rather than their setbacks was what allowed the settlers to maintain the determination that was necessary for their recovery. The next days are consumed with repair work. You're fixing the damaged structures, salvaging what crops can be saved, and restoring order to the homestead after nature's disruption. Your mother, though she's still weakened from her illness, insists on contributing what she can. Her knowledge is guiding your stronger labor. "You're getting to be quite the homesteader," she comments as you successfully repair the chicken coop roof without any guidance. "I hardly recognize the city boy who couldn't collect eggs without getting pecked." The observation, delivered with the closest thing to humor you've heard from her, acknowledges your transformation over these weeks on the frontier. The skills you've developed, the resilience you've demonstrated, and your adaptation to the conditions that once seemed impossibly primitive, all mark your integration into this harsh but functional world. A week after the storm, as life has begun to return to its normal rhythm, a distant figure appears on the eastern horizon. It's a single rider, approaching slowly along the faint trail that connects to the main road. Your mother watches his approach with a cautious hope, shading her eyes against the morning sun. "It might be news," she says, not specifying what news she most hopes for. "Word from your father, information about the mines, or simply updates from the wider world that you've been disconnected from during these crisis-filled weeks." As the rider draws closer, her posture changes, the tension visibly leaving her body. It's Thomas. She identifies your neighbor, the gaunt man who had traded butter for eggs weeks earlier. It looks like he's coming from town. Thomas brings multiple forms of news. There are letters that have arrived at the general store for the local families, updates on the market prices for their crops and their livestock, reports of events in the territorial capital, and most significantly for your household, information about the mining operation where your father is working. The company's still hearing, he reports as he accepts the coffee your mother offers. And they're paying as promised too, which isn't always the case. There have been no major accidents reported in the last couple of weeks. This indirect reassurance, this absence of bad news rather than a confirmation of good news, was often the best information that the frontier families could hope for regarding their absent members. Without any direct communication, no news became good news by default, which allowed for a cautious optimism rather than a constant worry. Thomas also brings word of other dangers that have emerged in recent weeks. A band of horse thieves is operating near the territorial border. A dispute between some cattle ranchers and farmers has turned violent about 30 miles to the north, and there's an outbreak of measles in the nearest town. Each of these threats represents another facet of frontier danger: human malice, conflict over resources, and disease in the population centers. None of them directly impact your homestead at present, but they all serve as reminders of the varied ways that your security could be undermined in this precarious environment. Before he departs, Thomas delivers one final piece of news that brings a genuine relief. The railroad company is sending engineers to check the water quality along the creek. It seems there were complaints about the mine tailings contamination all through the valley. This rare instance of an outside intervention, of an authority addressing a common threat that the individual settlers couldn't manage on their own, represents the gradual transition from a pure frontier self-reliance to a more organized governance that characterized the West's development over time. As Thomas rides away, your mother seems momentarily lighter, buoyed by the indirect news of your father's likely safety and the potential resolution of the water contamination issue. But frontier life allows little time for extended reflection or celebration, and it quickly returns you both to the necessary work of survival. The garden needs replanting, she notes, already mentally calculating what seeds they have remaining and what might still be able to grow in the advancing season. And that wall won't fix itself. The days that follow settle into a pattern of recovery and rebuilding. You're repairing the storm damage, replanting what was lost, and adapting to the changed circumstances with the resilience that defined frontier success. Your mother's health continues to improve, though the illness has left a lingering weakness. And that means that more of the responsibility remains on your shoulders than it did before. One evening, as you're sitting outside the soddy, watching the sunset paint the prairie in hues of gold and crimson, your mother joins you in a rare moment of restful contemplation. "It's not what you expected, is it?" she asks unexpectedly. "This life out here." The question startles you both in its insight into your outsider's perspective and in its acknowledgement of the gap between the frontier mythology and its reality. For weeks, you've been playing the role that was assigned to you in this strange time travel scenario. But in this moment, she seems to recognize your fundamental foreignness to this world. No, you admit honestly, it's harder, but it's also. You search for the right words, more real somehow. She nods as if this makes perfect sense. Folks back east have some funny ideas about what it's like out here. They think it's all adventure and freedom. A rare smile briefly crosses her face. There's plenty of both, I suppose. It's just not the kind they imagine in those novels. This self-awareness, this recognition of the gap between the frontier myth and its reality by those who actually lived it, offers a final lesson about the Wild West. The people who settled these lands weren't ignorant of how their experiences were being romanticized and distorted. They simply had no time or energy to correct the record when their daily survival demanded everything they had. Would you choose it again? You ask, curious about how someone who was fully immersed in this life viewed its hardships in balance with its rewards. She considers the question seriously, looking out over the homestead that represents years of back-breaking labor, constant danger, and precious little material comfort to show for it all. Yes, she finally answers. It's a hard life. It might kill us all yet, but it's ours in a way that nothing back east ever was. She gestures toward the distant horizon. Every day that we survive out here, we've done it ourselves. We have no master but nature herself, and she's a fair boss if a stern one. She doesn't care if you're rich or poor, just if you're smart and you're willing to work. This frontier philosophy, this valuing of independence and self-determination above comfort or security, helps to explain why people endured such hardships so willingly, even knowingly. The mythology wasn't entirely false. It simply emphasized the ideological rewards, while it minimized the physical costs of frontier life. As darkness falls and the first stars appear in the deepening blue sky, you both return to the soddy. The brief moment of philosophical reflection gives way to the practical concerns of securing the animals for the night, banking the fire, and preparing for another day of frontier survival. Later, as you're lying on your now familiar straw mattress, listening to the night sounds that once seemed alien but now form a recognizable symphony, you reflect on all that you've learned during this strange journey through time. The Wild West of reality was indeed wild, but not in the ways that popular culture portrays it. The true wildness lay in nature's indifference, in the precariousness of survival, and in the constant adaptation that was required by an environment that offered opportunity and danger in equal measure. The real heroes weren't the gunslingers or the outlaws, but the ordinary people who faced extraordinary challenges with a stubborn determination. People like your frontier mother, who endured illness, isolation, and constant hardship without surrendering to despair. People like your father, who risked dangerous work far from home to secure his family's future. And people like Martha, Thomas, and the Millers, who created a community in a landscape that constantly threatened to overwhelm human connection. Their stories, the true stories of the Wild West, contain less drama, but more courage than the mythologized versions. They speak to a fundamental human resilience, to the capacity for adaptation and endurance that allowed the settlement to succeed, despite the overwhelming odds. As sleep begins to claim you, your body tired from another day of frontier labor, but now accustomed to its demands, you find yourself grateful for this glimpse into a reality that few modern people truly understand. The romanticized Wild West of the movies and the novels has its place in our culture, but the actual lived experience, with all of its harshness, its complexity, and its unexpected beauty, deserves an equal remembrance. Outside, the coyotes call to each other across the vastness of the prairie. Their voices are echoing under a star-filled sky that's unmarred by any light pollution. Inside the humble soddy, two people rest in the temporary safety they've carved from a hostile environment through their knowledge, their labor, and their sheer determination. This is the real Wild West, not a backdrop for gunfights and glory, but a testing ground for human resilience and community. Its true story isn't found in the dramatic showdowns, but in the quiet heroism of daily survival against forces that would have overwhelmed any individual who was facing them alone. As your consciousness fades, you carry this understanding with you. A perspective on history that no textbook could ever provide. An appreciation for the complex reality that lies behind the simplified myths. Whatever happens tomorrow, whether you remain in this frontier world or you return to your own time, this knowledge has changed you, much as the frontier itself changed those who encountered it. The last sensation you feel before sleep takes you completely is the surprising comfort of your simple straw bed. It was once so alien, and now it's as familiar as the calluses on your hands or the weather awareness in your bones. Adaptation is perhaps humanity's greatest strength. The ability to find a home in the most unlikely of places, to create a sense of belonging in the face of a constant challenge. And with that thought, you drift into dreams of both worlds, the modern comforts you've left behind, and the frontier realities you've embraced, finding both value and limitation in each. You understand at last that the true history of the Wild West lives in this complexity, rather than in the simplified stories that would come later. This, finally, is the lesson of waking up in the Wild West. That behind every myth lies a messier, harder, and more human truth that's waiting for those who are willing to look beyond the comfortable narratives, to find the authentic story of how ordinary people faced extraordinary challenges. And sometimes, against all odds, they prevailed. And with that, you close your eyes and drift off to sleep, carrying with you the true spirit of the frontier. Not in the gun smoke and the glory, but in the quiet courage of those who built America, one difficult day at a time, finding their strength in their community, their purpose in their struggle, and occasionally their joy in the wild beauty of a world that was not yet tamed.